Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Readers Advisory Seminar for 2022. My name is Amy Heap. I'm from the Riverina Regional Library. I'm in Wagga. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which each of us are on. I'm on Wiradjuri country. I pay respect to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other First Nations people. I celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal cultures and languages across Australia. We have some great speakers and opportunities to chat amongst ourselves to share today. When you are sharing about today, please use on social media, please use the hashtag RA2022. Be great if you could stay muted during all the speakers. We will have an opportunity to unmute and chat later on during the day. There'll be plenty of time for discussion. And if you have any technical issues or other questions, please use the chat. And it'd be great to introduce yourself with your name, your library, and which land your library is on. So I think it's time to introduce our first speaker. Alex Brown is a librarian, local historian, author and writer, and an Ignite Award-winning critic. Much of their writing covers Black history, librarianship, YA and speculative fiction, and today they will be sharing fantasy trends with us. Welcome, Alex.
Hello. I've never spoken to like a big Australian group before, so good morning to y'all and good afternoon to me. It's pretty toasty here. In continuation of the land acknowledgement, I am currently on Chumash land in Southern California. And I'm from Napa County, California, which is Wapo ancestral land, even though that wasn't their actual name. But yeah, so continuing on with that. Okay, so I am going to talk, I know it says fantasy, but I'm going to talk about speculative fiction as a whole, because you can't really talk about just fantasy. They're all kind of blurred together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So let me share my screen here. All right, I'm going to minimize the little sidebar camera thing so you can see. And, oops, wrong button. Slideshow. Okay, so feel free to put questions and things in the chat. I will try to keep an eye on that. But if I miss it, then just duplicate it up again. Okay, so you want to talk, so you want to specify your library collection. Put that down there. So the what? Let's kind of get into this. I'm just going to dive right in. Speculative fiction, just to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page, because not everybody is familiar with that term. Speculative fiction is sort of the overarching, the umbrella for all sort of the, well, speculative stuff. You've got fantasy, science fiction, and horror sort of make up speculative fiction. There's a ton of stuff within that. There's subgenres and subgenres of subgenres and tropes upon tropes upon tropes. But the key thing is that horror is intended to cause fear. Science fiction generally involves science and technology. Fantasy generally involves magic and or mythology or folk tales. Magical realism is often lumped under fantasy, but it's not really fantasy. And you should never see white authors identified as magical realism. That is specifically a colonial, a genre done by people within colonies. So like specifically Latinx or Latinx people, but anybody under colonialism writes that. I would also encourage you to be careful about using fantasy for indigenous stories. Here in the US, we use Dewey Decimal System. I'm not sure if you use that in Australia, but indigenous stories and mythology, quote unquote, often get labeled as fantasy, despite it being active, current spiritual and religious practices. So be careful of that. And you can get in debates, is Star Wars science fiction or is it fantasy? Well, it's science fiction because it's in space, but it's also kind of fantasy because the whole midichlorians thing is completely bananas. So anyways, moving on. So reader's advisory. As you probably know, there's two different kinds of reader's advisory. There's the direct kind and the indirect kind. Direct is pretty obvious. There's the formal interview, the casual conversation. Some people do forms. Social media can also be direct readers advisory. I'm not sure if they have it in Australia, but here in the US, Thursdays from 9 to 10, we do Ask a Librarian on Twitter using that hashtag. And so, random members of the public can use that hashtag to ask for book recommendations. Personally, I use the casual conversation more than I never use formal interview. I work with high school students, so 9 to 12. And if you can imagine trying to force a 14-year-old to sit down for 30 minutes as I hammer them with questions, it's just not going to work. So the casual conversation is usually how I do it. Indirect is a little more obvious, of course. You've got your recommendation list. A lot of times they're based on awards or read-alikes, themes, current events, staff picks, memes, blah, 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 blah. Displays can be really good tools for indirect readers advisory, and events, of course, like book clubs, author events, book talks, things like that. It's probably stuff you're already doing. But it is helpful to think of that as readers advisory and not just, well, I'm going to put up a book display. Like, actually think about what books you're putting up, why you're putting those up, what your theme is. Like, you can really use it as readers advisory. Media such as newsletters or podcasts, virtual displays, like if you've got the ability to do a display on your website or in your online catalog, posters and signage. I often put up signs around my library of, if you like this, then try these books, to kind of guide people around. Social media, of course, is another big one. I'm going to talk about social media multiple times. Book Twitter is huge, Bookstagram, BookTube, BookTok, staff and patron recommendations. If you can embed them in the catalog, that is really awesome if you've got a really dynamic catalog and can do that. I'm going to share these resources and things with Ellen when I'm done. So this presentation, she'll actually be able to look at some of these. But I do want to kind of show you some examples of some readers advisory here. So I work at a boarding high school in Southern California. And this form that I'm showing you is for our alums, basically, so they can still get book recommendations. And I use the term, I don't call it readers advisory, because again, I work with teenagers. Readers advisory sounds so formal, and kind of like this big official thing, and they get kind of nervous, wanting to do that. So I came up with this term. I call myself the book doctor. And kids can get book doctor recommendations from me, or parents, students, all that kind of stuff. So it feels more fun. It feels more casual. They can say, "Oh, can I get a book doctor, please?" And then they can just show up and do that. So the book doctor, I have the cure for all your reading ills. It's the one and only pun that I like. So this is basically my just little cheat form, and these are similar to the questions that I ask in person too. What would you like me to call you? And I always phrase it like that if you don't know the person, because what they want to be called may not actually be their given name or the name that other people know them by. What pronouns would you like me to use? Again, don't ever say preferred pronouns. My pronouns are not preferred, they just are my pronouns. And some people use different pronouns for different situations. And then I ask them what kind of genres they're interested in, or subgenres that they're interested in, to kind of help me narrow down. Some people really don't like speculative fiction. Some people only want to read fantasy, whatever it may be. I also try to squeeze in formats and age ranges. I know they're not really genres, but most readers don't care about the difference. I always like to know what they really don't like to read with a genre. So some people really like horror, but really hate reading body horror. And I'm actually one of those people. I like horror, but I really hate body horror, and I don't want to read it at all. So knowing those differences are really important. I also like to ask what the last 3 books they read that they liked, and why, and what the last 3 books that they didn't like and why. And for me, again, I work with students, so I incorporate, I let them use their school books that they read too. Did you really like The Great Gatsby? Why? That kind of stuff. But finding out what they're reading, and maybe they just read Cloud Cuckoo Land, but absolutely hated it because of X, Y, and Z. That gives you a lot of really useful information. I also like to ask if they like a format, because knowing how they want to read will also change my recommendations, because they really like audiobooks, but I'm going to make sure I skew my speculative recs for audio narrators that are really good. Like, if I know that they really like science fiction and clones, but they also really like audiobook readers, I am absolutely going to recommend like The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey, because Exie Sands is one of the best audiobook narrators just on the face of the earth. So that's just kind of, that's basically, this is the form, but this is basically what I ask my students in person when they ask me for book recommendations. It's basically these questions. You'll see formal interviews that are way more in depth and are like super detailed, and these really long interviews. And I would rather just give them these recommendations. When I give them back recommendations, it's usually between 5 and 10 books. I try to pick a majority of the books that are right on exactly what they want. And then I always pick a couple of stretch books. So I pick a book that's that's got, some connection, but maybe not 100%. Maybe it's still science fiction, but it's not about clones. And then I always pick 1 or 2 books that isn't related hardly at all. Like it's really a stretch, but there's something in there that I think they would really like. And I would say probably 7 times out of 10, my students end up taking one of those stretch books as well as their actual recommendations. And I use that as an opportunity. I don't tell them it's a stretch book. I just put it in the list. But it's an opportunity to kind of help your readers, your patrons grow their interests without feeling like you're, well, you need to read more of this. Well, it's not about that. It's just maybe we can try new things too. It's not just about always reading the same thing, although they're totally fine when they do. But to give your patrons a chance to, if they want to try something new, and maybe they'll learn or they'll discover that they really like space opera as well. So I always try to put 1 or 2 stretch books in there. Okay, these are just some examples. So this is the library that I work at. You can do these on social media as well. I really like doing, if you liked this, then try these, or, read-alikes, basically. I really like doing read-alikes. My students like them a lot too. This was one I did for Squid Game. So graphic novels and comics and manga and murder books. And again, some of these are really tenuously connected to Squid Games. Sometimes it's just about murder. Sometimes it's just bloody or whatever. But the point is that, you get them hooked in, you get a couple of stretch books in there, and they tend to like it a lot. This, by the way, is not speculative fiction, but it is by far the most popular book that my teenagers are reading. Ace of Spades. Like, I can't tell you how many teenagers have been freaking out to me about that book. Let's see here. Oh, this is don't be afraid to use pets. This is one of my former rats. He's passed away now, Percy, but I did book recommendations, kind of, or reader's advisory. Pets are huge. I get my teenagers to ask me about my rats all the time, but that's a great way to get a lot of attention on your posts, is sticking some cute animals along with your books. Let's see here. Oh, so I mentioned earlier newsletters. Yours are probably going to look way prettier through public libraries with Canva and all of that. My kids don't really care about Canva. They just, want to see the books. I go way old school with just the Google Doc. But I always do like interesting links to check out. I don't know if this is something you'd want to do, but my students and my faculty love it. They're articles that I've come across that I think are really interesting, even if they have nothing to do with anything. And so a lot of the students have ended up using those articles in homework assignments and stuff. My favorite reads, staff picks, are a huge, great way to do reader's advisory. It's like, just put a book up, put a little staff pick sign with a line or two. I'll show you a line or two about like why it's cool, and your patrons will eat it up. And then I list my new acquisitions. And this might be something worth doing too, listing some of the new books that came in, particularly from marginalized authors. A great way to do reader's advisory as well is to tell people what you've got. This is something that I'm very excited to try over the summer. I'm going to redesign my library, or at least the fiction, to do dynamic shelving. And again, another really good reader's advisory tool. It's basically turning just, your regular shelving of books and really using it to, make it colorful, making it inviting. It allows you to do like shelf talkers and things like that along with your books. It allows you to keep all your series together. To do face out. Face out has like doubled my circulation counts. I usually do face out on the ends of my shelves. I only have my shelves about 2/3 full, and then the end is usually a face out book, and those books like fly off the shelves. So doing a lot more face out, I think, is really going to help my circulation. Especially, again, I work with teenagers. they're not going to just browse through. And if you just watch your patrons too, even your adult patrons, watch how they browse the shelves. If it's just a solid wall of books, you know, you tend to get overwhelmed. I mean, the example that this librarian uses is the difference between going through a bookstore and, you know, you get excited about the face out books versus a library which is like lines of books, and it can, unless you know what you're looking for, it can be a little overwhelming. And last but not least, I don't know if you know who Becky Spratford is, but she does a lot of the horror stuff here in the US, and she's amazing and wonderful. And her blog, RA for All, is super helpful, not just in general, but also specifically for horror as well. I use it a lot because I don't read extensively in horror, and so I use Becky's recommendations a lot. There's some, this is just some of my stuff. So as Amy mentioned earlier, I do write a lot about speculative fiction, and I've been writing about speculative fiction, both reviews and just kind of writing about it in general since 2010. So I've been doing it for a long time. I write for Tor.com, who also now publishes. I write for Locus Magazine, which is a science fiction fantasy magazine. And then I also just started writing for NPR Books as well. So this is kind of my jam. So there's lots of links. I'm not going to go through all of these links, but when you get the slideshow, please go through these links. I'll go through this one at least. I compile all of the new young adult speculative fiction titles that are coming out every year, so you can kind of plan ahead. But then I also do like reading recommendations and guides, and you know, everything that you should have from 2001, all that kind of good stuff. So there's a ton of stuff in there. Okay, moving along. Let's see here. Let me slideshow this again. Okay, so things to be aware of when both you're doing collection development in general and also when you're doing reader's advisory. The individual books, just because you found a book that seems like it fits, doesn't mean that that is a book that is worth recommending. You do need to actually make sure that you're going through those books. Tokenism is huge, so make sure that when you're doing your reader's advisory, you're not just doing, you know, you have like the one quote unquote diverse book and then the rest are all by cis het white authors. You're not just doing a book display of queer authors during Queer History Month. Like they should be all, this kind of diversity needs to be in all of your reader's advisory all of the time. Being aware of colorblind, you know, comments and microaggressions, both within your displays or your reader's advisory and also just sort of in general in your collection development. Make sure when you're looking at the books themselves and the authors that you're being aware of any sort of problematic issues within the text or within the author themselves. You know, that the book isn't pushing Orientalism, you know, or anything like that, or maybe the author is super terrible and likes to get on her little turf soapbox, and maybe we don't need to recommend those books anymore. So you just always want to watch that kind of stuff. Within the book itself, you really want to pay attention to tropes, and I don't mean tropes in general, like you know, the love triangle or things like that. What I mean are some very specific tropes. So a lot of times you see like the Black book, quote unquote, and all of the books for Black History Month are all about the struggle. It's all, you know, the whole book display is all about slavery. And it's like, oh, can we not? So make sure, you know, the books that you're picking by marginalized authors are not just about the struggle. The racially tinged tropes, putting that in sort of sarcastic quotes. So the white saviorism, the noble savage, the magical Negro, the dragon lady, Latin lover, all those kind of stuff, angry Black woman, a lot of those tropes tend to show up. And so you need to make sure that that the books that you're recommending don't have those in them, or at least be aware that they're in there. Hopefully they're done for, you know, sort of ironic purposes, but the worst thing you can do is, you know, give a person of color a book that is super offensive about their race, because, you know, that sucks. And it's happened to me before as a patron. And then other tropes too, like fridging. So that's killing a female character to motivate the man. That's super common and almost impossible to avoid. The kill your gays trope, which basically kills off all the queer characters, again, to motivate the straight characters, or excuse me, the non-queer characters. the evil albino, the superpower disability. I mean, you can't necessarily avoid these things, but definitely be sure that you're aware of them in your books. With each book, whether I'm adding it to my collection or doing reader's advisory, if I'm not already aware of it, you want to know who wrote it. You want to understand what identities are represented. Are there any problematic elements or online controversies, whether about the book or about the author, and will it cause harm or foster inclusivity? And I know it feels like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, but the more you do it, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. And you'll start developing, well, these are the websites that I know to go to, or this is what I know how to search on Twitter or whatever like that. But reader's advisory, people tend to just, they do the reader's advisory and then they go on to something like Novelist, and then they find the list of books that match those key terms, and then they hand those books over to their patrons, and then that's it. And you can do that, and then you end up giving books to your patrons that either don't actually match what they're looking for or actually cause more harm. And like I said, I know that it happens because it has happened to me as a patron. So it's really important that you understand the books that you're recommending to people. You don't have to read them, but you understand what those books are about, what the content is, before you do those recommendations. Okay, so the where. How do you actually find books to recommend to people? That is a big one. There is a big website or a database called Novelist that a lot of people use. I don't use it because I don't pay for it, or I mean, I can't afford to pay for it. All of my money goes to student databases and books, and I don't have much money left over for anything else. What is it? I think it's called fantasticfiction.net is another one that a lot of people use. I don't particularly like it, but you could Google that. I prefer to do, and I'm using review sites sort of loosely, so book blogs. And again, the more you Google around and talk to people, the more you'll find these book blogs. But book blogs are great tools. The trades, of course, the big trades, Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, NPR Books, whatever Australian newspaper, I would normally say like LA Times or the New York Times, but whatever is in, I'm sure Sydney, the Sydney Times has like book reviews or whatever. But those are, those will get you the best sellers. They're not going to get you like the good quality stuff. A lot of times, particularly like Publishers Weekly and Kirkus, are really problematic in their reviewers. I don't know what kind of library organizations you have for reviews, but over here, Library Journal and School Library Journal can be a little sticky sometimes. There's one called Voya over here, which I dropped several years ago because they posted a really biphobic review. Like, you kind of have to watch, but the trades are there if you really want to use the trades. Goodreads, Amazon, of course. Amazon owns Goodreads. You've got to be really cautious on Goodreads because there's a lot of really racist Goodreads reviews. There's also One Star Charles, who is a unknown person who one-stars all of the queer books, whether they're out or not, just to drive down the ratings. I personally use Storygraph. It's a replacement for Goodreads, but again, you still have to watch the reviews there. But they can be really helpful, especially in the case of Own Voices reviews. So Own Voices is, somebody with a marginalized identity who has the same marginalized identity as in the book. So a Black reviewer reviewing a book by a Black author with Black characters in it. That would be Own Voices. So those reviews can be very helpful. And of course, me, I have a link of stuff to my reviews, particularly for young adult, but for speculative fiction in general. I focus my work on BIPOC and queer and other marginalized identities, but mostly BIPOC and queer. Oops. And then there's a lot of science, the phrase SFF/H is for science fiction, fantasy, horror. So speculative fiction. There's a lot of sites in particular that do reviews. Tor.com does a ton of reviews. Strange Horizons is a short fiction magazine, but they also do reviews. Locus Magazine, same thing. NPR Books does some speculative fiction, and Phia Lit Magazine also has some reviews both online and in their publication. Personal recs are really good too. Social media, if you're on TikTok, Book Talk is really huge. I'm on Black Book Talk, so I mean not like personally, I don't do videos, but I follow a lot of Black book talkers, so that's been really helpful. BookTube, Bookstagram, Book Twitter. I'm on Book Twitter a lot. And then just your patrons, friends, and family. I'm constantly like emailing myself titles to random books that people recommend for me. And then I just kind of stockpile them away. I've got a Google Doc at work that's just got lists of books that I need to look up and keep track of in case I want to recommend them or order them, things like that. So I always keep a little list. Sorry, check the time. Ooh, moving along. Oh, much faster than I intended. Okay. So I did want to give some recommendations. Wow, I really went through this fast. Did want to give some recommendations. So for fantasy, these are some books that are just out or are just coming out. Lake Lore by Anna Marie McLemore, one of my favorite authors. City Beautiful by Aidan Polidorus. Beast of Prey by Ayana Gray. The top row is all young adult fiction and the bottom row is all adult fiction. Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse is an epic fantasy, indigenous Mesoamerica epic fantasy. Moonwitch Spider King, Marlon James is epic fantasy, but in sort of fictional Africa. The Spindle Splintered is retelling sort of the Briar Rose myth. Oh, I forgot, Lake Lore is magical realism and queerness, and I don't really explain it after that. The City Beautiful is set in 19th century Chicago, sort of a murder mystery thing, and Beast of Prey is a magical Africa. Science fiction, Snake Falls to Earth is indigenous futurism, which is really interesting. It's like it's kind of like Afrofuturism or African futurism, except it's centered on indigenous storyways. Snake Falls to Earth in particular is really interesting because it's half traditional young adult fiction narrative style and then half Lipon Apache narrative style, so it's really cool. The Kindred, aliens come to Earth, do weird stuff. Etherbound by E.K. Johnston, one of my favorite space operas. Polyamory, there's queerness, it's really good. Light from Uncommon Stars, set in California, there's trans people and aliens and donuts and the Queen of Hell, and yeah, it's really intense. The Memory Librarian comes out, I think, next month, and it's a collection of short stories based on Janelle Monáe's Dirty Computer album. Desolation Called Peace, I think, is the second or third book in this series, and it's a really intense space opera series. And then horror. Squad is a graphic novel, and I always describe it to my kids as lesbian werewolves eat dude bros, because that's basically what it is. They just go around eating dude bros in the Bay Area. And The Taking of Jake Livingston is a ghost story. Mary Shelley Club is a sort of a murder mystery. And then on the adult side, you've got Jawbone, which is, I don't even know how to describe it, super intense. My Heart is Chainsaw, which is one of my favorites, an indigenous girl who's obsessed with horror films, tries to become sort of the final girl. And then Cherish Farah is brand new, and it's just super intense thriller, super intense. And so that is me with my links and all that kind of good stuff. Wow, when I timed this out earlier, it took much longer. I guess I really read very quickly today. But let me check the chat real quick. See if there were any comments. Ellen's remember to include books in languages other than English in all of your displays and not just for Harmony Week. Yes, that is a very good one. You should be ordering lots of books too. There's a big debate as to whether you should shelve your world languages in like separately or in like mixed in with the regular collection. I am switching mine into the regular fiction collection right now. It's in the 400s because it's Dewey Decimal and it's terrible. So I'm just kind of relabeling everything and just, putting it by author with all the rest of the books and just marking the language on the spine label. And my students have had a much easier time of finding things. And it feels more inclusive too than to just kind of isolate them out. All right, yes, please, if you've got any questions. I'm a big fan of Reader's Advisor. It is one of the being book doctor is like my #1 superpower. It's the only superpower I have. And I do it a lot. It's one of those things where like I get stopped, walking around campus and it's like, can I get a book doctor, please, Professor Brown? And I'm like, yes, what do you want? And then I just haven't come back. So I really like doing readers advisory. And so far my students think I'm pretty darn good at it. Okay, so we got a question from Samantha. How did you start building your base of books to recommend? Ooh, that is a good question. I tend to have a kind of an encyclopedic brain for random useless trivia, and so I can store a lot of that in my brain. But like I said earlier, I also have a Google Doc on my work drive, and I just pile books in there of things that I want to look for. Sometimes I'll put some keyword stuff. I know people who've done like full-on spreadsheets with like keywords and search terms and things like that. So if you're a spreadsheet person, you can definitely do that. But I like to just kind of justify, and I saved all of my book doctor requests. I either save them in my email or I keep, put the recommendations in another list, because a lot of times people will ask for similar things. I mean, it's rare that you get something like super niche, I want 1920s historical fantasy fiction set in the Midwest. Like you don't get that. People generally want big recommendations. And so you can use the same recommendation list kind of repeatedly, and I just swap out new titles to keep it kind of fresh. But yeah, and it's really just about like paying attention and reading reviews. And, I like Twitter because authors are on Twitter. And authors will not only recommend their own books, but they recommend their friends' books too. And so I get a lot of books that I wouldn't normally see, particularly from adults, like horror. I see a lot of that stuff on Twitter, and I just kind of file it away in my brain. Okay, we've got our book awards, a good way of finding great YA books. In Australia, we have the Inky Awards. So I'm going to say tentatively yes. I don't know the Inky Awards, but awards can be really good. You still have to do your due diligence and actually like look up the book and make sure it's appropriate, because sometimes books, books like American Dirt won a ton of awards, and you're just like, ah. So you still have to kind of like pay attention. But oftentimes they are at least good starting points. I wouldn't just take that list and just automatically buy everything or automatically put it on your RA, but it's a great way to like learn about new titles and check them out. Let's see, lots of links. Yay for Rebecca Brownhorse. Do you have any broader tips and tricks on getting teens to use the YA spaces a lot more? Ooh, ours is a little underused and we'd love to boost the borrowing. Yes. So events can be good, but you want to make sure that they're not like super formal, hardcore events. So one of the things that I had just started doing, and I just planned it. I was so excited. We were going to launch it March 16, 2020. It was this great thing. I had a whole bunch of kids ready to show up. We would have VR, and I called it Geek and Chill. And it was like teenagers this is when I worked at a public library, teenagers could just show up, and we were going to have VR, and they could like play games, and we were going to watch, TV. I had all the licensing all figured out, and then the pandemic hit, and I had to cancel the program. But I had like 50 kids who were like who would never showed up, who would like RSVP for this thing, who wanted to come. So those kind of things are really good. I actually do something similar at the library, at the school library that I work at now. We do crafts at lunchtime, and just like low key crafts, like passive stuff, button making. Friendship bracelets and lanyards are insanely popular. Like I have kids begging to do that all, and just lanyards, but kids love them, and bubbles and things like that. So doing that, the kids will show up and just love it. And so events like that, and just sort of in general outside of events, making sure that your book collection really reflects their interest. If you've got, The Witch of Blackbird Pond still on there, which I don't know if that was an Australian thing or just in the Americas, but it was a book that was old when I was, in high school. Like if your book collection is not relevant, not current, if it's not diverse, I mean, the #1 RA request I get is for queer books. Like, do you have more queer books? Do you have more queer books? And face out dynamic shelving is a big help. Heavily weeding your collection, like you do not want a YA section that's just packed full of books, because the kids will not go through those books one by one. And then when I was working in a public library, our reference desk was actually relatively close to the young adult section. And so I could keep an eye on that section, and not in the sense that I was like watching the kids, but like I have a pretty good sense now when a kid knows what they're looking for, and the difference, or excuse me, difference between a kid who knows what they're looking for and a kid who's not sure. And so I could kind of keep my eye out when I'd see a teenager go over there. And once I realized that they weren't quite sure what they're looking for, they're just sort of browsing around, I would do that, retail thing you said. I love there. You looking for anything in particular, or, just making sure that they know who you are. Like, you being a person is actually a big help, because hand selling really works. And if it's just this sort of empty space where there's nobody there, like, be there, talk to the kids, let them get to know you. That'll start bringing them in too. Let's see here. Yes, I will definitely share the slides. Let's see. Oh, yes. Good question from Aaron. Can you expand more on the magical cultures bit? Does that include, wait, it disappeared. Does that include Celtic and pagan, etc.? So I guess it could. I mean, the people practicing Celtic spiritual practices today are not actually Celtic. Like that ethnic group, so to speak, the original like ancient Celts that were there like during the Roman period, like there's no ethnic Celts anymore. So and the religious practices we've assigned to the Celts is not exactly what the ancient Celts were doing. So on the Celts. Paganism, it's a little different because it is a contemporary religious belief. It's not really tied to any sort of ancient tradition, so to speak, although there are often ancient traditions brought in, but it is an active religious, paganism is an active religious thing. So similar to indigenous beliefs, I would, it gets really sticky. It's like, whose definition of fantasy are we using? Are we using their definition of fantasy, like an indigenous person's definition of fantasy, or are we using Western definitions of fantasy? So in the West, God, the great coyote spirit that's common in a lot of North American indigenous practices is fantasy, because in the Western religious worlds, it's, animal spirits and things like that fall under fantasy. But to many of the indigenous people who have those beliefs, it's not fantasy, it's reality. So I try not to use the term fantasy unless the author themselves is using that term, and you just kind of really want to just be cautious about it. Is it like the Rebecca Roanhorse series, the Meridian, what is it called, the Meridian Cycle or something like that? That is actually fantasy. It's epic fantasy. It's not based on it's not based on one indigenous culture. Like, it's sort of a mishmash of Mesoamerican various assorted traditions and Polynesian, but it's not even based on their religious. It's sort of inspired loosely by a variety of indigenous cultures. You cannot read that book and go, oh, well, that's obviously the Dene. Like, you can't do that. So then that's obviously fantasy. But when it's, I don't know. There's no hard line. You just kind of got to be aware of things and keep an eye on it, and make sure you're not ascribing a label to an indigenous author that they may not appreciate. I guess the best way I can define it. Let's see. Oh, Ignite actually doesn't stand for anything. FIYA uses all caps. I don't know why I'm still sharing. Sorry, I forget to stop sharing. FIYA does not stand for any. FIYA just means FIYA, like the FIYA inside. And Ignite doesn't stand for anything, but it's a play on the word FIYA. Ignite was an awards done by Violet magazine a couple of years ago. So yeah, they just do all caps. Oh, there's a good question here from Naomi. Do you put your spine label identifying queer books? No, I do not identify any identities. And I'll actually add a link in here. I wrote a post for Lee and Loeb book blog about why you shouldn't put POC on your book labels, and it's a similar concept for queer. Absolutely not. It's incredibly tokenizing as a queer person. I know sometimes like if you have a school group or teenagers will say, I really want to make it easier to find the queer books, but it's this one time where teenagers just get to be wrong. You can tell them no on that, because it's especially if you've got a kid who's not out, they can't check out that book then because there's a giant rainbow on the side of it, and then they cannot have that identity. Or if they live in a place, like if they go home and their parents are super queerphobic, they can't bring that book home. It's just, or if there's like social pressure to not read queer books, anything like that, it's just incredibly stigmatizing. It's tokenizing. And then you get into the issues of, well, do you put a queer label on a book that just has one queer character? Do you put it on a book where there's a majority? What if the author isn't queer, but the characters are queer? What if the characters are straight, but the author is queer? Like, it just gets, so no. You can put that information in your catalog, like you can make sure it's in your description. You don't need to make like a tag or anything for it. And I certainly never use, I'm not sure what subject heading system you use. We use Library of Congress subject heading here. And there's like gays -- fiction. I hate that stuff. Like, don't put tokenizing stuff in your catalog or in your subject headings either. Just put it in the description. Do a book list for people who want to find queer, romance or whatever it is, and make sure there's enough information in the description that somebody can find what they're looking for that way. Let's see. Do you shelve YA by fiction by genre or alphabetically across the collection? That is another big debate. I do know people who have genrefied their collection. I haven't been. I think it's really a population thing. Like, if your patrons would prefer, if your teenagers would prefer things by genre, then genreify. The two school populations that I've worked for have not been interested in that. They read so widely that there's no need for them to genreify. The public library I worked at, had I continued to work there, I was pushing for genreifying the YA collection, just like we had genrefied the adult section, because the kids were really looking for that. So it really depends on your user base, and that's something. Surveys are great. Ask kids. If there's kids floating around, just ask them. Hey, do you want this genre? And teenagers will tell you. So yeah, it's right now I do alphabetical, but if my teenagers change their mind, then I'll switch it up. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I talk really fast. I can't help that. I get excited about books. Or would anybody like a book doctor? I could book doctor for you too. Happy to get. Actually, maybe I can get like a show of hands or something on the screen, or for those of you who are here. Who does not read speculative fiction at all, or is not aware of what's going on in speculative fiction? It's like, hopefully many of you are at least somewhat aware. Yes, and oh no, that's totally fair. It's kind of good to know. Yeah, it can be a sort of a daunting thing. It's like trying to get into comics. It can be really daunting to know what to dive in. And there's a lot of trash in speculative fiction. There's a lot of trash. It's like romance. There's a lot of trash in speculative fiction. So finding good sites and things like that are really good ways to weed out some of the less quality stuff. Let's see here. We use LGBTQ or LGBT. This is different than we use in the States. LGBTIQ fiction subject headings, or gay and lesbian fiction. Yeah, some people do. I think for me, identity-based subject headings feel tokenizing, because again, the same issue that you had with labels, like who gets that? Who are we, or where are you drawing the line with when you put a subject heading and when you don't? I don't know. It's just then the book stops becoming like a book with lesbian characters in it and just becomes the lesbian book. Like, it loses when you start adding subject headings like that. To me, they start losing the breadth of what the book can actually be about. So as a person with a variety of queer identities and a variety of marginalized identities, putting marginalized identities in subject headings feels very tokenizing to me. It's like I stopped being a person. I'm just the asexual. Like, and asexual is not it's one of my identities, but it's not the entirety of my being. The entirety of my being is not Black, like, you know. And when you do those kind of identity things and subject headings, it starts to kind of like strip out the complexity of human life. So that's why I would say no to subject headings and things like that. Let's see. I do like to be frightened, but I don't like really bloody frightening things. I really hate jump scares. Let's see. What is your usual turnaround time for Book Doctor? Well, so that particular form, so that's for alums in general. And since alums aren't on campus, that turnaround time has a couple of days. But usually when I get asked by students, I try to turn it around the same day, hopefully within a couple of hours. If I get the feeling that they don't want to come back, then I'll just do it right then and there. And I'll literally, like, I make them follow me through fiction, and I just start pulling books off the shelf. And I'm like, whatever you don't want, just leave, you know, in the returns basket, and I'll take care of it. You can check out whatever you want. But otherwise, I try to do it same day, so usually within a couple of hours. And I just leave them a stack. I try not to hover with my teenagers, because if you're standing next to them while they're looking at a book, they're gonna either check out the book because they feel like they're supposed to, because you're the adult and you're telling them something, or they're gonna get really uncomfortable and not want to check anything out at all. So I like to just hand them a stack of books. Like I said, if I'm pulling it immediately, I hand them a stack, and then I just say, take what you want, leave what you don't. I don't, you know, whatever you want to do, and come tell me what you know, when you're done reading, come back and tell me what you liked and what you didn't like. And I just kind of leave them to that space. And then for the kids who are going to come back, I just leave. We have a little hold shelf area, and I just leave them the stack of 5 to 10 books with the same thing. Like, just pick out what you want, leave what you don't, and then come back and tell me what you thought later. So that tends to work pretty well. I enjoy horror commute reading. I also read fantasy and science fiction. Sarah Gailey book. Oh yes, do I actually have that book here? I think I might have loaned it out. Yes, the American Hippos series by Sarah Gailey, which is based on a almost true thing that happened in the United States, where they were going to put hippos in the Mississippi Delta for food. And then somebody at the very last minute realized maybe that's a bad idea and we shouldn't do that. So we almost had hippos in the United States. Okay. Any last questions? You can always find me on Twitter and Instagram too. And on my blog, you can feel free to shoot me an email. Oh, actually, maybe I will show you some of those links real quick. So we've got a little bit of time. I'll do it super, super quick. So I'll make this very, very quick. So Tor.com, they do all their upcoming releases for speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I do their young adults. It's not all of their books, but I do like a spotlight collection. So I pick like 20 of the best, and they're almost always the most diverse ones, diverse quote unquote. So those are on there. So, but Tor.com usually compiles all of like science fiction, fantasy, horror, and genre bending, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a great way to get a big long list of things. I already showed you the Airtable. I do recommendation lists on my blog. So every year I do summer reading recommendations for 9th through 12th grade. I also do some read-alikes. They're mostly for podcasts right now, but I do some read-alikes. And then somebody mentioned like awards and best ofs. So every year I do the best young adult speculative fiction. But a lot of sites like Tor and Locus will do, Tor also does like their reviewer's choice. So again, these best book lists are really great ways to get good book recommendations and things like that. And they'll often have sort of read-alikes, like if you like this book by so-and-so, you'll like this. And then this was just my Locus Magazine year of review. So again, it's the same thing, highlights of highlights of really interesting books. A lot of times, the reason I'm recommending a lot of these sites, like the science fiction fantasy sites, versus just the trades, is because to be in the trades, to have your book reviewed in the trades, the publisher has to pay the trade to review it. So you pay Publishers Weekly to review your book, which is often why the reviews are so positive, because some of those sites have like a positive mandate, like you're required to give a positive review. So whereas like for Tor.com, I try to write positive reviews, but if something's really terrible, I'm also going to note why it's terrible. So you don't pay to be in Tor, or you don't pay to be in Locus and a lot of the speculative fiction sites. Those sites, like somebody like me says, can I review this book? And then they go, okay, let me get the book for you. So there's no transaction between the reviewer and the publisher. It's literally just you email the publicist and get the book. So the reviews tend to be a little more honest and a little more in depth. People who are reading those or writing those reviews tend to be really like big science fiction, fantasy, horror people, rather than just a random reviewer who got signed a book. And we also can cover a lot of the indies. So again, because you're not having to pay, like Tor.com doesn't require a fee to have their book reviewed. It means that if I find a really interesting book that's being published by Neon Hemlock, which is a really small indie press here in the US, who publishes some really amazing speculative fiction, they don't have the budget to go through Publishers Weekly. I mean, because that can cost you a couple $100. I mean, it's a lot of money to pay to be reviewed. So I can cover indie stuff that would never get covered by those trades. And the indie stuff, the indie publishers and small publishers, I'm sure Australia has them too, like is just putting out some really amazing stuff that the trad publishers and the big publishers are not doing. So those are great for speculative fiction indie stuff too. Okay. Well, it's 4. Oh, well, I don't know what time it is. What is it? 10:30? It's 4:30 for me. But I'm happy to end early if there's no other questions. But
well, if there are no other questions, we will just say thank you so much, Alex. I am a reader of speculative fiction, but I still learned heaps and have pages and pages of things that I want to read, things to avoid, things to start doing. That's been really, really helpful. So thank you from all of us. That was brilliant. Have a good evening.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoy the rest of your all-day conference thing, and I will see you on the internet. Thank you so much.
Bye. Before we move on to our next speaker, I'm sorry, this is kind of something that I need. I've had a really big cup of coffee, so I might give us all 5 minutes to take a quick little break, doing whatever you need to do, and we will be back in a minute with our next speaker. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's time now to hear from Alison from Galaxy Bookshop, who will be talking to us about fantasy trends and topics. Welcome, Alison.
Hi. I am not sure, are you able to see me on this or hear me? Ah, great, awesome. Okay, well, thank you all for your time and for your interest in providing a wider range of reading for your patrons. We appreciate that it can take up a lot of time to keep track of books that are coming out and which ones are actually worth keeping in your collections. So a little bit about me before we get started. I've been working at Galaxy for almost 12 years and had been a customer there for about a decade before that. I read primarily romance and paranormal romance, YA, urban fantasy, space opera, and I'm also branching out into more subgenres of fantasy and science fiction. I run the store's book clubs with romance meeting on the first Thursday of the month and the science fiction fantasy book club meeting on the third Thursday of the month. So I've actually got a meeting coming up tonight, and we're currently doing that on Discord. So Galaxy is owned by Abby's Bookshop and specializes in fantasy, science fiction, paranormal romance, horror, and has collections of books on Star Wars, Star Trek, game worlds, RPGs, all sorts of fun stuff. We set ourselves apart from other bookshops by actually reading a lot of the new stock that we get in, and we also make a lot of recommendations. We regularly import from the US, as well as a lot of the standard stock you will also find in stores around Australia, and also from the UK publishing. In terms of publishing trends, fantasy currently has a greater readership than science fiction, so a lot of my time will be focused on that and its various subgenres. We've seen science fiction and fantasy leave the fringes of entertainment, and it's taken its place in popular culture. So we've seen that a lot with Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and The Witcher. And I guess one of the big takeaways from today, I would hope that that people get, is that these are very popular books that it engages readers, it broadens imaginations. It basically makes people think about the human condition and also what is possible or what may be possible, if not now, then in the future. And I guess where they sort of see their place in the world and the world as a whole. So I just sort of find that very interesting from a very sort of, like a zooming out kind of point of view, but also just they are very engaging stories to read because you can handle some very larger than life concepts and emotions, and they are just like you get some massive rides in science fiction and fantasy. So fantasy is a subset of speculative fiction with a magical element in its setting, plot, or characters. It is set in a fictional world that may or may not sort of be based on folklore or mythology. It may be somewhat sort of inspired by our world, or it might be something completely different that has its own consistent set of rules. The current wave of fantasy fiction was popularized by the Lord of the Rings trilogy, published in the 1950s, and cemented by C.S. Lewis's Narnia and Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea Saga, all of which are held as beloved classics. And I tell you what, every Christmas we have trouble keeping these books on our shelves. They are the classics that everyone goes to when they're looking for introductory gifts or things like that to get people into the genre. Epic fantasy, a subset of fantasy, it's so named by its fantastical world building and magic system, its heroic characters or plot, and often relies heavily on the conflict between clearly defined good and evil and the exploration of moral issues. There might be a dark prince to defeat, a fight to prevent one's own descent into evil, and the story arc often presents as kind of like a coming of age or a rite of passage for the protagonist. The best known example of an epic or high fantasy would probably be Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Thanks to the success of adapting Juggernaut's Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones for the screen, showrunners have been looking at other popular epic fantasy book series to adapt. The Witcher is also a big one. It's been very well received and has broadcast its second season for streaming on Netflix. And the latest at the moment is Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. And the premise of that one is that at the dawn of time, a deity known as the Creator forged the universe and the wheel, which has 7 spokes, each representing an age or an eon. And it's rotated by the one power. Humans who can use that power are known as channelers, and the principal organization is the Aes Sedai. The Creator imprisoned the Dark One and sealed him away from the wheel. However, an Aes Sedai experiment inadvertently breached the Dark One's prison and allows his evil influence to sort of seep into the world. In response to this threat, the wheel spun out the dragon. It's a channeler of immense power. And the Aes Sedai and the Dark Servants are both actually looking for this the Dragon Reborn, but no one knows who he is. It's kind of been narrowed down to a particular village. So the Aes Sedai enlists 3 potential candidates and their friends to join her on quest to further the cause of the Dragon Reborn. This is a massive 14-book series. Each of them are like 1 to 2 inches thick, so it's quite an investment. But I would start with the first 1, maybe 4 books, because a lot of readers have found that the series kind of does take a little bit of a dip from books 5 to about 8 or 9 before it starts to pick up back up again. So I think if you are getting readers who are just sort of starting out, the first 4 would probably be a good starting point for those. Authors in a similar vein include, and sorry, I've just forgotten to do this with my PowerPoint. And it does not want to do anything with the screen. Okay. Sorry, just bear with me for a moment.
I'm just going to unshare it and reshare it.
It does not entirely want to cooperate with us at the moment. Great. Okay, so there we have The Wheel of Time, the first book in the series with its tie-in covers. They have also recently rejacketed them to show landscapes, and they also did that with the Game of Thrones books to sort of, I guess, attract the more mainstream readership. So other books in a similar vein would be James Islington's Lacanus trilogy, which we've had quite a few readers compare favourably to The Wheel of Time when it was good. And also a new author, Mark Timity, who is a local talent. This is his first book, The Blood of the Spear, and also has been gaining quite a bit of buzz for sort of taking on the epic fantasy, but bringing it into the 21st century and bringing sort of modern sensibilities so that you have less of, I guess sometimes with older stories, they can be a little bit dated, and sometimes the values in them are also a little bit dated, whereas this is more a 21st century love letter to the epic fantasy genre. Another standby is Brandon Sanderson, who is incredibly popular and incredibly prolific. So there is several series going at any one time, and we're looking at least 1 to 2 books across the board coming out every single year. On top of which, he has also recently got a Kickstarter going, because during the pandemic, he kind of secretly wrote another 4 books, and with, I think it's still got about another couple of weeks to go, he's had over $34.5 million on that Kickstarter. So the main series that you want to keep an eye out for would be Mistborn and The Way of Kings. The Way of Kings is coming out now about every 3 years. It's expected to be a 10-book series. 4 books are out at the moment. They are so thick that you're better off getting them in the trade paperbacks if you can. They're about that thick. They've even run out of stock because they were being printed on Bible paper just to keep all of the story in there. And then when they drop down format to the B format, they get split into two, because they are very, very meaty reads. Epic fantasy readers are not going to be disappointed with those. So other series to look out for, or other books to look out for, Daniel Abraham. He's an established fantasy author, but other people might also know him as half of the writing team, James S.A. Corey, who wrote The Expanse, has also been adapted for streaming. So this book, The Age of Ash, is the first in the Kithamar trilogy. It's kind of a slow burn, character-driven atmospheric fantasy about secrets, thieves, grief, and dark magic, and it's sure to engage readers. Also looking at Richard Swan, the Justice of Kings. Richard Swan is a Sydney author, and I believe this one might actually be his debut. It's his debut. It's the first installment in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, which balances character development and world building in a very compelling story. Our hero is a justice. So basically he is the judge, jury, and executioner all in one. He's investigating what should just be a simple murder of a noblewoman, but sort of tug on that thread, and then it starts to unravel this conspiracy that could bring down the empire and the entire justice regime. Another one to keep an eye out for is The Red Knight. It's the first in the Traitor Sun cycle. It's complete at 5 books. It's a very historically accurate kind of alternate medieval sort of setting with a very interesting magic system. And it's kind of gritty, it's sort of realistic, and really does a good job in depicting kind of like the foibles of humanity. There is another series, the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. It's also been quite popular, but to be honest, I do hesitate to recommend it despite its popularity, because it is supposed to be a trilogy, but there has been a long wait for book 3. No one knows what's going on there. It's supposed to have been written, but he's not happy with it, and there is no date. There has not been a date. I think we're waiting for about a decade and counting. So heading over into grimdark fantasy, this one is a very, very massive subgenre in fantasy. It kind of blurs the line a lot more between hero and villain, whereas with the epic fantasy, the line is very sort of clear cut. This sort of blurs the lines a lot more. You end up with your anti-heroes, morally grey characters, and you kind of have a lot of grit and violence, and possibly less magic. Nothing in this is sort of guaranteed. So character motivations, good triumphing over evil, none of that can be depended on. Arguably, the genre was established by earlier authors like George R.R. Martin, Glenn Cook, and David Gemmell, but the current wave has really been defined by Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy. The Blade itself up there is the first one in that. So it's a very meaty series. It's got 2 trilogies and some spin-off books, and also a short story collection. Our manager is a massive favorite of this author. Basically, when someone comes up to him looking for a recommendation, his motto is always Abercrombie. So his review basically is, it's more often than not a battle yarn told from the point of view of the cannon fodder. This is great stuff, a rich range of well-crafted, believable, flawed characters, each with a well-defined personality. I really like how Abercrombie changes the style of the narrative voice depending on which character is being followed. This adds a subtle and surprising depth to the believability and immersion of the tale. Abercrombie also shows a sensitive side to the characters, and these glimpses, often dropped in the muck of bloody moments, shine with insight all the more. These books are well worth a look, but beware, they're riddled with swearing and bloodshed. Mark Lawrence, author of Red Sister, he made his name with the connected Broken Empire and Queen's War trilogies, but it's his completed Book of the Ancestor trilogy that readers could not get enough of. Possibly even more gritty and violent than you would expect from a convent in which girls as young as 8 are being taught to kill, but with complex and intricate world building and dramatic lyrical prose. One thing that when we make a recommendation of this book to readers, we sort of open them up to the first pages, and its opening line really gets people in. It is important when killing a nun to ensure that you bring an army of sufficient size. For Sister Thorne of the Sweet Mersey Convent, Lano Taxis brought 200 men. I think they're kind of like the whole juxtaposition there of, of first of all, killing a nun, but also taking 200 men and hoping it's going to be enough. The Pariah by Anthony Ryan, here's another name to keep an eye out for. He consistently delivers. This is, I think, possibly the second trilogy of his. Sorry, no, the third trilogy, I think, or the third series that he's been working on. In this one, he does something a little bit unusual in limiting the storytelling to just one single point of view, and that's being presented in the format of a diary. So it's less in the way of classical fantasy trappings, less magic and fewer supernatural creatures. And also the fights are probably a bit fewer, but they have a greater impact for all of that. John Gwynne, this one is a really great debut, absolutely worth keeping on the shelves. It's a tale of blind greed, ambition, and betrayal set in a world where ancient monsters are reawakening, and a war to end all wars is about to begin. The author was very clearly a fantasy fan before he was ever published, and it shows, because the story, what he's done is he's taken a lot of the popular sort of tropes and just sort of folded them back on themselves, tweaked them a little bit, but it's done really well and with respect and affection. He loves this series and kind of does a lot to flip it on its head, but also deliver an amazing story. So it appears to be a simple book, but it's also quite layered. And it's a tale of humans and basically how violent and vehement we can be when we are fighting for something and when we believe in something, even when we're wrong. So The Shadow of the Gods, also by John Gwynne, that is the new saga. It's a world inspired by Norse mythology this time, and it kind of makes the myth kind of feel like a bit of a shadow, like it's kind of there, but kind of not, but it sort of feels like it's something almost tangible that could almost tear your throat out. It's got characters that are well developed and relatable, even when you don't necessarily agree with the motivations, but they still make sense. And the fight scenes in them, they just feel so real and immediate and visceral. This one is just absolutely recommended. Book 2 is due in less than a month's time. Okay, David Ragg, The Articles of Faith. There are 2 books in this series available so far, The Black Hawks and The Righteous. This one is an action-packed fantasy adventure with humor and creative swearing, but don't be fooled. This one is basically as dark as they come. There might be the odd sort of cliche that makes you think that you can predict what's coming, but you'd actually be wrong. And also The Black Hawks ends in a cliffhanger, so you really want to get both books at the same time so that your readers can go straight from that into the next one and not have to wait. Another very atmospheric one is the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan, beginning with Promise of Blood. It's an alternate history fantasy set in kind of like an alternate French Revolution, and it skillfully combines magic with technology, where in a fantasy you would hear, or in a story you would usually get one or the other, but this one does both and blends them well. And the magic has consequences for overuse or misuse, and magic is not just a cure-all for it. So it's really good where you have this system that's it is kind of like it's got rules and it's got consequences, instead of just magic being this this unlimited resource and sort of like a magic bullet that cures everything. It's very much not the case with this. The characters are the kind of people that you might actually want to spend time with, and the ending really packs a wallop on it.
Okay, so I'm going to reshare
Okay.
because it looks like we're not, although let's just have a look. I'll just go and look at my screen to see. Okay. Oh no, do you need to reshare?
Okay. Great, sorry about that. Thanks for bearing with me. I just had something unusual pop up on the screen and wasn't sure if that meant that I was still coming through or if I was basically speaking into the ether. So yes, the Poppy Ball by R.F. Kuang. This one is it's a dark story of an orphan girl taken in by a family of opium dealers, and she fights to be able to live a life of her own choosing rather than one that's been chosen for her. It draws on the Second Sino-Japanese War and deals with things like horrific war scenes, torture, the abuse of prisoners of war, self-harm, ableism, racism, drug use, addiction, and there is also off-page rape that happens as well. So obviously this is the kind of story that does not pull any punches, most definitely for the adult section of the library. The author basically wanted to explore this part of Chinese history and was saying that opium was the source of Chinese weakness. This book asks what would have happened if opium were instead a source of shamanic power. This book is primarily about military strategy, collapsing empires, mad gods, and the human ability to make awful, ruthless decisions. It's about how dictators are made. For all of its darkness, the characters have kept a lot of readers anxiously turning pages. The Poppy War definitely fits the definition of a grim dark fantasy, but it also has a very different feel to a lot of its contemporaries. And as I was saying with George R.R. Martin possibly being one of the early grimdark authors, while that series has been massively successful, if you don't already have that series, I'm also a little bit hesitant to sort of say, yes, get that one as well, basically because there's been a massive wait between the 5th book and the 6th and 7th books that we know they're coming, but we have absolutely no idea when. Also, the end of the streaming series, it's sort of been somewhat controversial. There have been fans who've been like, okay, yeah, a lot of fans who really were not very happy with it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the sale of those last 2 books, especially if the end is not expected to be largely different from what we've seen and what entirely may not have entirely satisfied the long-term fans. Okay. So there is another subgenre of fantasy. We try not to call it low fantasy. I mean, it kind of is sort of low fantasy in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of the trappings of like the high fantasy, the epic fantasy. But we also don't like to use the term simply because it might sort of imply like a lower quality of fantasy. Like you've got your high fantasy, your big epic adventures, and then you've got low fantasy. No, these ones are absolutely well worth not overlooking. Absolutely have to check these ones out. So The Coward by Stephen Arion. This one is the first book in a duology. The second book is going to be out later this year. It's the first in the Quest for Heroes. The premise of it is that Kel Cresia was once this idealistic teen who followed a band of heroes who were going to kill off the Ice Lich. And on that journey, he discovered that the heroes weren't actually necessarily all that heroic, or they weren't necessarily very good people. And while they did take effort to train him, he also watched them die on the journey, die during a battle, and he was the only one who killed the Ice Lich and then made it back. He's wanted to lead this quiet life. He's a farmer. He's gone through a lot of PTSD, and when his king calls him up, because it looks as though maybe the ice lich has somehow returned, he's like, yep, no, I want no part of this. I've done my bit. I am done. Nope, no. But he kind of does end up getting cornered into doing it, and then has to try to find a way to pull off this. Like he was lucky the first time, and he's not expecting to be so lucky the second time round, but he's got to find a way to succeed again and do basically what feels like the impossible. One of the things, this is also another one that I thought opened really, really well. The hero rides out. Kelcressia, slayer of the ice lich and savior of the 5 kingdoms, tripped on a rake and fell into a pile of horse shit. With a vicious curse, he scrambled to his feet, trying to brush the moist, steaming turds off his clothing. Instead, he managed to smear it down the front of his shirt and trousers. Also, if you like a little bit of humour in your fantasy, another one to move on to would be The Gentleman Bastards by Scott Lynch. There are 3 books out so far. The 4th book is in editing, and the edits have been slowed down a little bit by COVID, but it is actually coming. This is a fantasy city inspired by Renaissance Venice. The series begins with the lives of Locke Lamora, and Locke is an orphan who is adopted by this very shady priest who teaches him the way of the long con. Locke and his found family are engaged in a heist when the criminal underworld faces a mysterious threat that jeopardizes them all. It's funny and it's gritty and it's clever, and it also doesn't pull any punches. It's one of those ones, sometimes you can read a book and feel like, okay, yep, our hero, everything's going to be fine, nothing's going to happen to him. That's not necessarily the case with this one. There are absolute stakes involved. There is just so much happening with this one. There was a lot of foreshadowing, and things are sort of coming full circle in this book, ready to begin almost from the beginning again with the second book, where Locke has to sort of rebuild somewhere else. The Earthsea Saga by Ursula K. Le Guin. This was also a recent, very soon post-Tolkien. It's followed very soon after J.R.R. Tolkien with The Lord of the Rings and Hobbit and the Silmarillion, etc. And he kind of had started a bit of a trend, or just generated a lot of interest, because he did extensive world building, created its own language, and there are books on the history of Middle Earth. There are actual books dedicated to reference for the world. Whereas with Ursula K. Le Guin, the Earthsea Saga has its style is much more economical, but for all of that, you don't actually feel like you're missing out on anything. The story is you've got a very solid plot. The story is sort of very clear cut and well told. It might possibly feel a little bit dated because the first book was published in 1968, but once you sort of move back and start to get into it, it really draws you in. The series is complete at 6 books, and you can get them either as an omnibus or you can get them all individually as well. The Discworld by Terry Pratchett is an absolute must-have. Definitely kind of fits the definition of a low fantasy, because while there is magic there, it tends to be more satire than anything else. It's a satirical fantasy set as a flat world that is a disc that is supported on the back of 4 elephants standing on the back of a giant turtle, and one of the books, or at least one of the books, does actually debate the gender of the turtle. So Terry Pratchett is known for holding a mirror up to human behaviour with a lot of very irreverent humour and sharp insight. We may have come across his Boots theory of economics, really. The UK Office of National Statistics in January discussed his Boots theory. It was the idea of how it costs a lot more to be poor. because instead of being able to buy something of good quality and have it last longer, you spend less money, but you get less quality and it doesn't last as long, which means you end up having to keep spending and consuming and spending and consuming, so that you can end up spending, you can be poor and end up spending more money than a rich person or someone of means, but yet have a lot less for it. Now, the series ended with Terry Pratchett's passing in 2015, but there are 41 novels. You don't necessarily need to get all of them. A lot of them can sort of be read as a standalone. As a short list, I would include The Colour of Magic, Equal Rights, Mort, Guards, and Hogfather. And Hogfather is kind of like the Discworld equivalent of A Christmas Story. So definitely a classic worth having. And heading into urban fantasy. So this is a subgenre that is kind of set very much in the modern world. There may be magic or supernatural creatures like shapeshifters, vampires, witches, and so on. The genre often lends itself to crime fiction with a bit of a supernatural twist, or there's often some kind of investigation involved. The world at large may be aware that there are more than humans existing, but more often than not, the supernatural must be hidden from the general public. Often the investigators will have some kind of a power or a talent that gives them a bit of an edge in their investigation, but there will also be complications associated with that. Jim Butcher, with the Dresden Files, has been a pillar of the genre for decades. He's got 17 books and counting, all published since 2000. Harry Dresden is a down on his luck wizard PI in Chicago. And Chicago is basically unaware that magic and vampires and witches, etc. exist. His side hustle is consulting on unusual cases with the police. In the first book, he's called on for a double murder that's got a very definite supernatural signature to it. But he also needs to investigate that while hiding the truth from the police, and they know he's not being entirely forthcoming. But on the magic side of things, he's in another rock and a hard place, with the White Council believing that he's the killer, but he's not, and the mob wanting him to look the other way. This character can be also kind of very sort of laissez-faire, but this is the case that kind of gives him a bit of a kick in the pants and starts spurring some character growth as well, which we see over the course of the series. In The Rivers of London, we have another protagonist who needs a good kick in the pants. Peter Grant he's a probationary constable. He's about to be assigned his first job within the constabulary. And this is a very big deal because this is going to be the trajectory that his career is going to take. So while he was sort of competent enough, he hadn't actually done much of anything outstanding. So he's just assigned to be a pencil pusher. And part of the feedback that he got is that he hadn't shown much in the way of initiative. So he does that. There is a very odd case that comes up. So he starts going to the crime scene in his off hours, where he meets DCI Nightingale. And he is a cop who's kind of on the fringes, sort of like a little bit looked down on, because he does tend to attract or take on the weird cases. This is a police procedural blended with fantasy, and The Rivers of London is basically, it's kind of like the gold standard at the moment. A lot of the times, a lot of new books in urban fantasy will come out and the publishers say, oh yeah, it's a new Aronovich, it's just like Ben Aronovich, but there is very little that actually is like Ben Aronovich. Shauna Maguire is also a staple in urban fantasy, with 2 series out at the moment. They're both ongoing. So in Rosemary and Rue, the Toby Day series, October Day she's a changeling, or kind of like a half mortal fae. So instead of someone who's been stolen and then swapped by a fae, she's half human, half fae, and grew up in the Summerlands, but because of her human heritage, was not treated very well there. So she thought, okay, look, I'll come to the human world and I will, I'll live my life there, only to find betrayal on this side as well. So she's just trying to live this very quiet sort of a life. but there is a murder that then ends up, she is then cursed to solve that murder. So she's being dragged against her will back into this world. And a lot of her story is about having to straddle both sides of her heritage, and also just try to find it, fight out for a world and a life that she wants to live for herself. Also moving on to the Encrypted series, beginning with Discount Armageddon, there was a covenant created that basically anything that any sort of creature that was not on the Ark is deemed unnatural, and therefore needs to be exterminated just across the board. Our heroine's family is one that sort of over time sort of had broken away from that, and they act as the buffer between the cryptids, or those the creatures who are not on the Ark, and the humans. So they kind of see it as as a case-by-case basis. You don't deserve to be exterminated just for being a cryptid. You need to, you deserve as much protection as the humans do. Like if you have actually done something wrong, then yep, by all means. But if you're just living your life, then you don't deserve to be harmed just for being different. The series, while the first book kind of does sometimes end up returning to Verity, it does jump around through different members of the family and also different parts of the world as well. Because I think there was actually a book set in Australia. Anne Bishop, who arguably is probably best known for the Black Jewels trilogy and Black Jewels series, is making a massive resurgence with The World of the Others. So the first book in this series is Written in Red. It's a very interesting take on human history, because a lot of stories are based on humans being the dominant species, or that we were here first and we weren't. The Terra Indigene were, and the Terra Indigene could be anything. They could be vampires, elementals, shapeshifters. They're all sorts of creatures who aren't human, have very little in common with humans, and as a result don't really have a whole lot of patience for humans. We've been known throughout history of when we want to take a little bit of land, we might say go over to the wrong side of the forest, and then we get eaten. Someone actually had the bright idea of trying to trade with the Terra Indigene, so that as we get land to grow our food on, and to use for manufacturing, and also to use for housing and things like that, we agreed to trade with them. But we're basically there on their sufferance. So while humans will start to think that this is human land, it's really not. And so there is just a lot of underlying tension in the books as we try to negotiate human and Terra Indigene relations. There are courtyards which are sort of like liaison points between humans and the Terra Indigene. Our heroine for most of the series is a Cassandra Sang, which basically means that when she's cut, she has the ability to make predictions. These are they're kind of like a very childlike and innocent kind of a race, because they can get lost in their visions, and also lost in the feeling that comes with having been cut and to see a vision. They need a lot of looking after, but that also means that they can be open to exploitation. Meg escapes from a facility where the Cassandra Sang are being held, and takes the job as the liaison officer at a courtyard, because human law does not apply there, which means that she's got the protection of the Terra Indigene while she's working for them. And there's this, it's kind of a slow burn romance there with one of the shapeshifters. It's just this really interesting story of building bridges and creating this community while there are so many disparate voices there. It's very, very engaging, and it is just interesting to have this this point of view where humans are not the apex race. Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. It's an interesting one. It's the first in the Edinburgh Night series, and it's set in a near future alternate dystopic Edinburgh with as a Zimbabwean Scottish teen heroine. But although the heroine is a teen, it's really not a YA. It's more an adult read. So she earns a living talking to ghosts and passing on messages to the living and looks for missing children. She's strong and smart. There is I guess there is a little bit of potential for the YA crossover market there, but also it's going to have a lot of appeal to adult readers. In The Dying Squad by Adam Sincox, D.I. Joe Lazarus thinks he's about to storm a farmhouse and take down a notorious drug gang, but what he actually finds out when he breaks in through the doors is his own corpse. He has been recruited to the Dying Squad, basically he needs to solve his own murder in order to escape from purgatory. And he needs to keep on going through and acting as joining the police force in the afterlife. It kind of is a little bit like Rivers of London in the sense that it combines the police procedural with fantasy, but it does have a very different feel to each other. Moving on to A Master of Jinn by P. Jelly Clark. It's set in an alternate 20th century Egypt with a lesbian detective heroine. It's the first book in the series. There is a free online novella, A Dead Jinn in Cairo, that might make the story make a little bit more sense, but you can also still get into it without it and start with A Master of Jinn. It will absolutely impress readers with the world building. It combines steampunk elements with gods and technology and the supernatural, as well as history. It's influenced by British colonialism, thinking about that time in history. And the Brits were recently overthrown by the Jinn. Also, suffrage meets misogyny and bigotry because the early 20th century. But it's this very vibrant and atmospheric read with a strong female cast that gets the nod from Galaxy's resident lesbian. Jade City by Fonda Lee. It's a Japanese-inspired urban fantasy with the feel of an action movie and the scope of an epic fantasy. It's a story of rival organized crime families with access to magical jade that gives those with the right martial arts training and skill super strength. Once they protected their island from invasion, but now they're into construction and commerce and fast cars. Gang rivalry is rising and a war is coming that will determine who retains access to the jade. This is a very sort of simplified description of the story, and there is so much going on with tradition and loyalty and family and corruption and treason, vengeance, tragedy, forbidden love, honor, power, sexuality, and mercy. And in a complete switch, moving on to science fiction. So science fiction is a genre of speculative fiction, which typically deals with imaginative and futuristic concepts, such as advanced science and technology, space exploration, time travel, parallel universes, and extraterrestrial life. It spans a wide range of themes that often explore and deal with the consequences of technological and scientific advances. And one of the things that I like about it is that it deals with the human condition in the face of a changing world. One of the subgenres is what we call sort of like hard science fiction, which is based on like the hard natural sciences like physics and chemistry and astronomy. It's kind of as opposed to like the softer sciences like psychology and sociology and so on. And the story tends to be more reliant on scientific content. Other subgenres tend to fall under more like the soft science fiction umbrella, because although they may involve sciences like time travel or space travel or have a futuristic setting, the basis is more on the speculative and less based on actual proven science. One that every library needs to have is The Martian by Andy Weir. It's the best recent example of hard science fiction, as the story had been fact-checked by the author's scientist friends and that before it had ever been published. And it basically had been going through and checked for realism. He had done his research and also saw actual scientific scientists and said, okay, look, in this particular scenario, does this actually seem realistic? Does this ring true? And adapted his story where he needed to for that. Most of the story is told in the first person by Mark Watney, a stranded botanist believed dead by his crew when they were forced to leave him behind on Mars during a storm. But here's this interesting and sympathetic protagonist, also kind of a bit of a pain in the ass for some of the higher ups in NASA to deal with, but not our problem, not the reader's problem. We just get to enjoy him. The story also zooms out, so it's very much about his day-to-day life, surviving on this hostile environment where he needs to find a way to grow food, monitor his atmosphere, and and hopefully wait it out for a few years while someone actually can travel back and collect him if they ever do. But it also then zooms out to world politics and I guess all the international diplomacy and politics involved in kind of arranging this this hasty mission to pick up this person. This one person is going to cost billions of dollars, but so that it boosts morale and people's belief in the space program and to keep people's support on it. So this book is available in both the original version and there is also a young adult with the language sort of toned down so that it can also go into young adult collections and also be available for schools. Another author that has got a lot of buzz and won a lot of awards is Cixin Liu for the Remembrance of Earth's Past, beginning with the three-body problem. It's set on this epic stage, and there's a lot of science in there that he's got a very commanding grasp on, but he also kind of does try to make it a little bit more accessible with varying degrees of success. Honestly, your mileage will vary on this. But the trilogy was originally published in Chinese and was translated over into English, which also again makes it something quite different to what we have in the Western readership at the moment, simply because of having been raised with a different culture. He also takes a different approach to science and science fiction. Foundation by Isaac Asimov. This one is a classic series, but it's experiencing a resurgence thanks to its adaptation on Apple TV. In order to prevent the descent of civilization into a 30,000-year dark age of bigotry and violence, the Foundation is created on another planet to preserve as much of the knowledge of the current culture and society as it possibly can. It's an ambitious story told on this absolutely colossal scale, with as much emphasis on science as it has on political, sociological, psychological, and religious ideas. It was originally published in the 1950s, so despite the brilliance of its premise, readers can be a little bit divided on whether or not the prose comes across as heavy and dry, or if it imparts its full meaning despite its economy of style. And one of my favorite subgenres, space opera. And I kind of see this one as being like the science fiction equivalent of urban fantasy, where instead of magic, you have technology and aliens instead of supernatural creatures, and travel between planets faster than the speed of light. Its main difference from hard science fiction is that the story is driven more by the characters than the science, and the science kind of takes a little bit of a back step and becomes part of the setting. The depths of the stories can be, they can range anywhere from like lighthearted fun up into somewhere, something quite gritty. The Expanse by James S.A. Corey is absolutely one of the big space operas to have come out onto the scene, and it has made a huge splash. And it was probably basically inevitable because it was written by a well-established author in Daniel Abraham, and also Ty Frank was George R. R. Martin's assistant, so picked up a lot of cues from that. The series was adapted by Netflix and then later taken over by Amazon. Humans have colonized most of the solar system, but tend to see those who live on the different planets or even in between the planets on, like in the asteroid belt, and they're known as belters. They do very much other. There is a lot of othering going on based on where you are, where you live, where you work. There is definitely a clear class struggle as well, because you might have people who are on the belt who put in a lot of labor that then makes it easier for the people on the planets to live. But then they're also kind of looked down on it because they're poor and because they are doing hard labor. So there is definitely sort of a struggle there. The first book begins with a missing girl who is from a wealthy family, but she's also an activist. And it then quickly blooms into an alien invasion. And I don't really want to say too much about that because there would be quite a lot of spoilers involved in that. But it starts off small, but oh my God, it just, boom, it goes out onto this massive scale. It's not just about a missing girl anymore. Chilling Effect by Valerie Valdez. It's a quirky space opera with a Cuban American or Cuban female captain, an alien love interest, a Black trans partner, and other characters spanning a range of gender, race, and neurodiversity. And there are lots of pop culture references in there, several of which I'm sure sail straight over my head. The author is also a massive gamer, so there will also be little references in there that are going to appeal to gamers, and basically geek culture is going to love this book. So there's a lot of humor in there. There's also character growth and also psychic cats, because psychic cats. There are 2 books in the trilogy currently available, and the 3rd one is coming out later this year. Moving on to the Protectorate trilogy by Megan E. O'Keefe. This one, it just has like these, oh my God, massive, massive moments in it. Commander Sandra Grieve it opens where she's in battle and she's about to die, but she wakes up on board an alien or the enemy AI ship, and is then shown through a view screen that the war has ended over 200 years ago. Her home planet and everything that was in that sector is now gone and absolutely completely decimated. There are lots of twists and turns, and like there's just no other way to describe it, but holy shit moments in this book that come out of absolutely nowhere. Also, the cast of characters is sort of quietly diverse as well. You have an amputee heroine. There's also sexual diversity, a male AI on board a ship where ships are often called, like she, but Barrow is very much he. And you have these, you don't actually really notice the diversity so much simply because it just exists as part of the world. It just is. It's there's no big deal made about it. It just exists, which I thought was also really cool. But yeah, I cannot say this enough. This trilogy is an absolute massive epic ride. It does not let up. Artifact Space by Miles Cameron. From the first page, the reader is on the run with the protagonist, and story also. This is another one that does not let up on you either. Aside from all the intriguing little and not so little mysteries, the author's historical fiction and epic fantasy roots really shine through in the world building and in the depth of the characters that he's created here. The Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers is also an incredibly popular one, but it's quite different. She burst onto the scene with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it earns fans with the inclusion of strong female characters with agency. And they can be anything in the series from politicians and leaders to soldiers, doctors, mechanics, and anything in between. And much like the real world, not everyone is it's not all about like white guys. It's a very sort of diverse range of characters in this, but also not really a very big deal made about it. It just is. And you have aliens. They also have a wide range of cultures there. They don't all fit the gender binary. We don't all communicate the same way. But this series is odd in the sense that there's a lot of potential for conflict, but a lot of stories will be based on conflict. Like this versus this, trying to achieve that, but you've got to overcome this. Whereas this is very much, it reads like a slice of life. You're getting to know the characters as they travel, but at the same time, while they meet up with each other, and they start to get to know each other. They do go out of their way to understand each other and to find middle, common ground, so that where you could have, violence or bigotry or that, you really don't. They go out of their way. They are aggressively nice, if that makes sense. Now, the Foreigner series by C.J. Cherryh has also a long-running series. It begins with humans' first contact with the alien TV race and the development of Bren Cameron from a young sort of helpless human to, and he's in over his head when he begins. But he becomes, or because he's the only human who can communicate with the Yetivi, he becomes a diplomat. And you kind of see the character developing into someone, with agency, with strength, with maturity, and who is able to make a lot of headway with first contact. We also have military science fiction, which kind of does, can sort of feel like a branch off a little bit of space opera, in the sense that you do have, like your heroic characters that you follow through, but it's also quite different because of the very military spin on it, where a lot of it is, like it's set in a space army or a space navy. David Weber's Honorverse is like, this is a juggernaut in military space opera. And so a lot of it does involve things like the chain of command, of conflict or of battles, but also just like your heroic characters. Now, the Honorverse can essentially be kind of summed up as a lady hornblower in space. So Honor Harrington, like Horatio Hornblower, is heavily based on Thomas Cochrane and Lord Admiral Nelson. And she's a tactical genius, she's a skilled martial artist, and she's also a highly competent officer. Her story, beginning with On Basilisk Station, blends military science fiction with space opera as we follow our heroine through battles and career and character development. Aside from being this long-running series, there are also different series that offshoot from that as well, so you get to explore other aspects of this world. Similarly with Jack Campbell's Lost Stars. So Captain Blackjack Geary was believed killed in battle, and he was celebrated as a legend. But a century later, his escape pod is discovered, and he awakens to a new world in which he is hailed as a hero. He's kind of very reluctant to do that, but as the conflict and the war continues, he finds that he is expected to live up to this myth. The series is kind of simple and accessible, but it's also very action-packed and very much like if you're looking for something that's going to, it's very escapist. So if you're looking for, I guess, like action adventure, battle, all of that fun stuff, and this series is complete at 6 books, but there are also 3 other spin-off series. And The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield this one is an alternate history. So as you might expect with an alternate history, a lot of the times, a lot of the subgenre is based on, what if Hitler won the war? What would the world be like then? So it's speculative fiction. If you look at history and say, okay, right, what if this thing that happened in history didn't? Or what if it was flipped around and the opposite of what actually happened? What would this then mean? So this one is set in the 1980s during the Cold War, and it's impressively written by a former astronaut who brings his experience to describing things like the fierce G-forces of launch, the frozen loneliness of space, and the fear of holding on to the outside of a spacecraft orbiting Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. And I also think that fans of The Martian are going to appreciate Hadfield's attention to detail and his technical knowledge. So I just think that's really cool. An astronaut, you get science fiction and that written by an astronaut who has actually lived and done the things that he's writing about, and you don't get that very often. So that's sort of pretty much of a roundup of the things that are happening in science fiction and fantasy at the moment. But also, if you're looking at where to find out more, there are a lot of places where you can find out what's happening with these subgenres. One of the really obvious places to look at would be the award winners. So things like the Hugo or the Astounding Awards, the Nebula, Locus, which is based on a magazine, World Fantasy Award, Aurealis, which is an Australian award, British Science Fiction Fantasy Awards, Arthur C. Clarke, and Philip K. Dick and David Gemmell all have awards for science fiction and fantasy. So also Locus magazine will keep you up to date on things. IO9, which is a website created by authors Annalee Newitz and Charlie Jane Anders. There's also Grimdark magazine, which is an e-zine that reviews books across grimdark and dark fantasy through to cyberpunk, sci-fi, space opera, military science fiction, and even horror, as well as offering interviews with authors of these genres. The Nerd Daily, Epic Reads if you're looking for young adult science fiction fantasy, streaming platforms, because there is a lot that's being adapted now into series and movies. So that's also a place where you sort of get to see what stories are going to be, what's capturing the public attention. Also things like publisher newsletters and social media. And then also there is Galaxy Bookshop, because this is what we do. We specialize in science fiction and fantasy so that we know what's happening, what people are reading, what they don't like so much. And we've been working with libraries for quite a few years. So along with Abby's Bookshop, if you place your orders via Abby's, everything gets consolidated and sent out. I believe a lot of you have also met and spoken with Bruce Turner from Abby's Bookshop. But yeah, if you also have any questions, feel free to reach us at sf@galaxybooks.com.au. So it's basically science fiction at galaxybooks.com.au. So if you've made it through to all of this, because I know there's been quite a bit of an info dump, hopefully the slideshow will also make it a little bit easier to sort of take a look at these are the subgenres and this is what's happening at the moment. So thank you for bearing with me, and also with the technical difficulty we had a little bit earlier. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Alison, for sharing all of that knowledge and your enthusiasm for these books. I know that is going to be really helpful for all of us for helping our patrons find things to read, and it has exploded a lot of our TBRs. I did a little bit of reserving via my phone while you were talking. Starting with the Library of the Dead, that one sounds up my alley in every way. So thank you so much, and everyone feel free to get in touch with Alison if you have any questions, or does anybody have any questions now?
Oh yes, and I did forget to mention, we do also offer a discount on orders for libraries too.
Excellent, thank you. Otherwise, it is time for us all to go and make ourselves a cup of tea, and we will be getting back here at 11:45, 11:45. See you then. Anything because we haven't been talking. I hope you've all had your cuppa or got it with you. Now we're going to move into our 5-minute talks. So hearing from our colleagues across the state about what they've been doing in the Readers Advisory space. And first up, we have enhancing click and collect services for all readers. And I'm actually not sure who is doing that. You just need to share your screen and unmute, and away we go.
They may not be sharing. Amy, maybe move to the next one.
Okay, which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Culture Club with Layla. Layla, are you here? No. How about Renata?
Yes, I'm here. That was that was a presentation.
Yes. Thank you, Renata.
I'll share the screen. Which screen am I sharing? This one. That one, and just bear with me. I'll just set everything. You are sharing the screen, and then we will go. Oops. Okay. Am I sharing the screen? Good. Okay, so my name is Renata Rekiel. I am a coordinator of programs and partnerships here at Canterbury Bankstown Libraries. And my 5-minute talk will be about our multicultural Let's Go series, which we started last year before the lockdown. So everybody who's involved with organization of the programs knows that it's not easy to organize successful library events. It is hard to catch the attention of diverse clientele. I don't think it's sharing. Am I sharing on the in a full screen or not?
No, you're not on full screen. What you'll need to do is go to the display settings up the top.
I've done that and
go
presenter.
Try duplicates.
Here we are.
Yep, perfect.
Is that better? Good. Good. Thank you. So it's not easy. It's not easy to organize a successful library events. It's hard to catch the attention of the diverse clientele of the multicultural LGA. And when you add COVID, weather, and the budget to the list, it becomes quite a challenge. So last year, probably around January, I was thinking about multicultural programs specifically. And I was trying to improve the cooperation between 4 of my teams: adult team, children's, outreach, and multicultural. And I had this idea of having a spotlight on one of the chosen cultures for 3 months to maximize the participation of the community and cast a wider reach. So the original idea was quite simple. We choose one of the many cultures represented in our LGA community, and then organize a series of events around it. They could be displays across the 9 locations, which gives us a perfect opportunity to promote our community languages, author talks, folk dancing, craft activities, basically any activity that would introduce or represent that particular culture to others. I discussed this idea with my team leaders in January 21, and we were quite ambitious. We wanted to start in February that year. We chose Greek and Polish as our pilot cultures, basically because they were the 2 cultures among the first original ethnic minorities that settled around Canterbury Bankstown after Second World War, but also the fact that 2 of our staff members were with Greek and Polish heritage, and that was quite important to rely on their expertise and advice. So we decided that February, March, and April would be a spotlight on Greek, followed by Polish in May, June, and July last year. Then, of course, things didn't work out due to COVID and the following lockdowns. But Let's Go Greek celebrations coincided with the bicentenary of the birth of the modern Greece. And our plans included panel discussion by Zoom on Greek cafes and milk bags of Australia. That was in February 2021. Online presentation of Lucky by Andrew Pipos. Craft activities like making a traditional Marti bracelets. We did some movie screening as well. And Myths and Mayhem, which was a children's evening that was filled with stories, games, and the crafts borrowed from the fascinating world of Greek mythology and legend. It was, I need to mention that, make this digression, we had an Iraqi boy who, among all the Greeks that came for the evening to celebrate the children's activity, he actually knew the most about Trojan horse, and his mother said that he was so fascinated by the story that he studied it in length the evening before And I thought that was a really nice touch, somebody who's not particularly from that culture being so much interested in it. There is obviously no celebration without food. So wherever we could, whether it was craft activities or those children's events, we were trying to encourage people to try some ethnic sweets. In this instance, the Greek, and I need to, sokolotakia, I hope I pronounce it correctly. So when it was time to organize Let's Go Polish in May, June, and July, we already had a little bit more experience, and I'm a Polish myself. So I started searching for people in our community who could contribute their talents in making those celebrations special. There is a Polish club at Bankstown, and that became my starting point, and a place where I met a lot of people who contributed their time and their skills to the success of our celebrations. I was told about the Polish photographer, Adam Wolnicki, who was just embarking on a photo essay about Polish immigrants who came and settled in Australia between 1980 and 1990. So I met with him and I invited him to organize a photographic exhibition of the work that he produced so far. The exhibition was called Pol Aussies, and it was on display at Bankstown Library for 3 months, drawing a lot of interest from the Poles around Sydney. At one of the special events at the Polish Club, I approached the performing band Kapela Polska and asked if we could organize an evening with the Polish folklore music. So the result, and there are the photos from the night where there was a lot of dancing, the result was a vibrant evening filled with the Polish and Eastern European music, with contemporary songs played with polka rhythms inspired by cabaret, jazz, and the gypsy culture. We had about 70 people that attended. We served sweets donated by the Polish Delicatessen and Polish jam donuts, which were purchased from the Polish bakery to the delight of all the participants and the staff. We also organized the screening of the Polish movies like Cold War, an Academy Award nominee for the Best International Feature Film, The Pianist by Roman Polanski that won multiple Oscars, and In Search of Chopin, a documentary which unfortunately was the only movie that we couldn't show because the lockdown and COVID intervened. We conducted a series of craft session of the Polish paper cutouts, which are called wycinanki. Our staff member, and she's featured right in the middle on the right-hand side photo, Sinmen. She's originally from Hong Kong, but she studied the craft of making wycinanki on YouTube. And I thought it was another example of showing how the cultures could, a Hong Kongese doing a Polish wycinanki. We found it quite funny. She became quite an expert. We planned to finish the Let's Go Polish celebrations with the bang, a theatre play of Dames and Hussars by the Polish poet and playwright Aleksander Fredro. But unfortunately, COVID and the following lockdowns stopped our plans, and we had to postpone that play a couple of times last year. But just a few weeks ago, it's not a few weeks ago, it's just a few weeks ago, on the 11th of February this year, we finally were able to stage the play at the Brian Brown Theatre with the attendance from about 215 guests. We even featured on SBS World News late that night. I thought it was probably an absolute record in terms of the attendance We never had a library program that would be attended by so many people. The play was performed by the Polish drama theatre Fantazja, who was formed in 2002 as a non-profit organization and performed plays for the Polish community for nearly 20 years. We are now into the third culture in our series, Let's Go Vietnamese. And this is the banner for the upcoming celebrations. I have to say that at the beginning of that series, we thought, okay, we do the Greek and Polish and we see how we go, but it became so popular with the members of the community asking, when are you going my culture, whether I'm being from Pakistan or from India. And it seems that even our council warmed up to the whole idea, and they, I don't actually have to ask for much of the promotion. They're very keen on doing it themselves, advertising in their newsletters, in the local press. So yeah, that's all from me. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. That looks amazing, and your library is beautiful.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Shazia. So Renata, you might need to stop sharing your screen.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shazia from Bankstown Library, and I'm going to share my screen. It is about the, during the lockdown, we have some trainings, online training for the staff. We thought it's a good idea to utilize the time and do something for the professional development of the staff in regards of Reader's Advisory. Just give me 1 second. Am I sharing?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So. Okay. So this is just brief introduction. I'm going to give overview about what we did, because it's a very long trainings. We have like 2 hours for each session, and there were several sessions we have done. So in 5 minutes, I'm just quickly sharing my overview of what we did in the trainings. We have 2 stages of the Reader's Advisory trainings. First one was the basic training, and of the overall staff, 51% staff attended that training. And the second stage was a little bit advanced Reader's Advisory training, and 49% of the staff attended that training. So what we did in the training, first beginning basic training, was the start with the definition of Reader's Advisory. We have discussions and we ask their views, and then after discussions we decided what is the Reader's Advisory. So we set this definition, we agree on that: a reader-focused service in which knowledge-able, non-judgmental library staff help readers with their readings. Reading means using knowledge of fiction and non-fiction material of the library collection and print and electronic reference tools. The Reader's Advisor helps the reader answer the question, what do I read next? So after setting the definition and what is the Reader's Advisory, next was the discussion on we give this who reads and why, and we have a lot of discussion, a lot of point of views, and after that we have an exercise on this comment: women read more or for comfort or empathy, men read more for doing or about doing. This is again a controversy topic we choose, and we have a nice discussion on that one. And after doing all that, we started setting what reference questions for the readers we should ask. So we start with the thing, who is it for? First, we start the question, open question and closed question, we have to establish early who the item is for. It's very important. And it was really appreciated with the staff because it was really helpful when they ask this question before they start doing the reference interview. After that, step by step, we go open questions and then closed questions. After that, we discuss the different titles, different readings the staff are reading. So we discuss the notion of appeal characteristics, such as the storyline, tone, pace, setting, characters, and writing style. So everyone who share their reading, they discuss all these notions and characters and storyline. I mean, all these characteristics one by one. And that was a really interesting discussion. Then at the end of all this first training, we sum up with saying, you know, what we have learned. First of all, the meet and greet, you know, we have to put the customer on ease. Our body language is very important. And then how we do the open question and closed question. And the last one is the know our collection. So working together using reference tools, explaining what we are doing to the customer and offering the customers our resources like a catalog, guidelines, website, and databases, and suggesting multiple authors. And the very important thing is a follow-up and seek feedback, not only from the customer, for our own self as well. But how we did, we can do better. We can ask the other staff members if they have this question, how they're gonna do it. And then this second, so at the after all doing this, we did some research together. We have some resources going through together, and then the second stage started is a readers advisory training, and that was a little bit advanced. We have given some, beforehand. They have to find the books. So before we start the readers advisory second stage, how we started, we just did the refresher of the readers advisory. What is it about? Then the definition, like we did in the basic training. Then we have given some pre-training activities to all participants. They have to find 5 titles in each of the 5 resources in the read. We have given InterRead, Libby, Amazon, BorrowBox, and Book Browse URL. So participants have to find 5 items in each of the resources and make a list. And this is the example how they have to complete the list, like list 1 and list 2, what for the different resources. It can be repeated title, that it doesn't matter. So we ask them to fill them, and it's not moving. Okay. So using the 5 lists, we ask them to answer the following questions and using the chat box during the training. So how many have you heard or know something about? And how many have you skimmed or read? And how many are unfamiliar to you? So each of them make those lists. And after sharing their list, we ask them locate a title which appears at least 3 times in those lists. And then we ask them, okay, can you identify the genre from that title they chosen? And then what are likely appeal factors, why reader would enjoy it? So we have a discussion on each of the titles they have chosen. And then I asked to the participant, can you give at least 2 read alike authors or book for the title? So they're using all the resources. They have given 2 titles, and then the activity 2 started with the analyze your reading list. And we asked them, okay, after all that, now you know what genre do you tend to read, and of the books you have read, what did you love the most? What genre are those in those titles you have chosen? So we have a discussion over there, and then our third activity start, which was using our library catalog and e-resources. I asked them, how would you help a customer with finding an item to take home? If we ask, pick a genre romance in Libby. So everyone go on the catalog and find in the Libby the romance, and everyone shared. Then we asked them to search InterRead for the patron who wants to read a story-driven novel. So after that, the third one was using Goodread, find a historical fiction. So so what factors and you find in that novel from the doorways. And at the end of this training, we have a new genre introduced to the participant, and it's about the gamer patrons. We discuss and we explain the ways to dialogue with the gamer patrons and help them how they can find in our collection. So we have a bit of discussion on there, and we have some examples. If a person like playing game Fortnite Overwrites, and so we can ask them to try our genre adventure stories, survival, and thrillers and suspense. So in this way, we have more discussion about and more examples and recommendations for our role-playing gamer. So we have discussed the more gamers' ideas, and after that, we have done together useful resources shared, and we explore them like Goodreads and Readers Advisory online. And that was it. I think my 5 minutes are done. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Shazia. That was, a really great use of lockdown time and looked like some really good training. And you will share those slides with us, won't you? So
Sure.
I think sharing training is one really good way of using the whole network.
Yep.
So
No worries.
that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and listening.
So next up we have Sabrina and Isabella.
Yep, I'm just going to bring it up on the slide. This is Sabrina. Izzy's with me here.
Hello. Nice to
Give me 2 moments.
middle, in the middle.
Oh,
Yep.
so sorry.
There we go. Okay.
All right. Everyone can see that?
Okay.
All right. Everyone can hear us okay?
Yep,
right.
you're all good.
Okay, so we're from Northern Beaches Libraries, and today we're talking about the steps that we took to improve our readers' advisory regarding our graphic novel collection. So this includes comics, manga, general independent graphic novels, and non-fiction graphic novels. Yeah, so we want to talk about this just because graphic novels is often quite difficult to get circulating, and so we were experiencing this in our collection at least. And so we kind of took the opportunity during COVID and lockdown to make some improvements. But firstly, the problems with our collection that it was spread over 6 branches. It was hard for collection. It's a hard collection of stuff to do RA because of this, and because everything was interfiled together. There was small display spaces, and it had very confusing classifications, which I'll get into. So yeah, like I said, it was spread out over 6 branches, which made it very difficult for customers looking for series, especially long-running series. It wasn't a fit-for-purpose collection either, so the series weren't kept together, and manga especially, but comics, graphic novels, they're usually quite heavily serialized. The collection also had gaps in series, and this was even harder for both staff and customers to access. There was also limited display space because it was across 6 branches, and shelving was difficult as the classifications were confusing. This had happened over time due to the the serial fluid nature of graphic novels, comics, mangas. There's a lot of changeover in that area of the collection with authors and illustrators. It's quite common. So this had just happened over time where things were being shelved all in the wrong place because the authors or publishers had changed. And so the classifications, both in our LMS and visual labeling, was wrong, and series weren't kept together or easy to find. So our solution for this was, the first step was to move the collection from these 6 branches down to 2 home branches, making it a lot easier to keep series together and keep it organized and neat. The second step was to then do collection management, which involved deselecting the collection, filling in the gaps for different areas, improving the accessibility and the RA for both staff and customers by doing this. So then our third step was to change our mark records, to change the new labeling system, to reflect the new labeling system, which was developed around the series or consistent authors and publishers. to make sure that, you know, all of Batman is in one spot, or Spider-Man's all together. You look at the shelf, you can find what you're looking for. Just making it a lot easier for staff to provide that Readers Advisory for customers, making a visual change. We also separated the collection into the 4 distinct categories. So the general graphic novels, manga, and then the comic section with DC and Marvel separated up. So this was the big thing that made it a visual RA change for us. And it is now the most outward facing collection in all of our branches. And it's classified simply and easily so we can direct the customers visually. So you can see here a couple of examples of what it looked like before we did the changes. So on the top picture, you can see from our DIY branch that all of it is quite packed in together. On the right side, there's actually 2 shelves where all the books are face down because we didn't quite have it set for proper height with the comics. And on the bottom, you can actually see that we had an overflow shelf for the graphic novels at Manly, which is off to the side rather than at the start of it, making it a bit confusing and difficult to find those ones that were placed there.
Okay, and so this is kind of an example of how the classifications have changed over time. So you can see on the right here, we've got it by series, and then it's got it by the author, and then some of them, there's a very old system as well that had just had graphic novels with stickers and no classification at all. So you can see already that these were all being shelved in completely different places. There was also some gaps that you can see in the series as well, and duplicates. And so the deselection and filling in these gaps was also a really large part of this process, was figuring out what was necessary and what wasn't for the collection. And this is just kind of what we did during lockdown. We took a lot of advantage of it, and it's a bit spread out, but this is our collection management, especially the deselection process. And oh, I went backwards. And then this is what it looks like now. So up the top, we've got all these outward facing shelves, which is really useful, and we've separated the comics into DC and Marvel over here. We've got the non-fiction and the general graphic novels, and then we've got a really good manga section over here. And all the series have been set to stay together either at DY or Manly in our collection system as well. So they come back to one of the 2 home branches. And down here as well, we've changed the shelving height and again put all the series together. So already for our circulation, the stats are much higher than what they used to be. We're consistently seeing especially manga being borrowed a lot more, whereas it used to be much lower and very occasional that someone would come in looking for a manga series. It's actually gone up quite high.
So what are our next steps? We've actually started on the training our staff in the changes to allow for the RA. So basically guiding through what's changed, what sections are what, how to tell the difference between DC and Marvel versus independent versus manga, just to make it easier for them to be able to then provide that RA for the customers. We've also begun cross-promotional marketing, such as tying in our collection with the most recent or trending superhero or anime films, and promoting our collection through events such as Free Comic Book Day. So we actually set up just the other day a Batman display specifically to tie in with the release of the Batman movie that was just the other week. And then we're also actively seeking customer feedback to ensure that the changes are actually working for them. And
Yep.
yeah, that's what we've done.
All right.
So much. That looks awesome now. And it's so good to see it reflected in the circulation stats as well. All that great hard work. It looks fabulous.
Thank you.
So next up we have Layla. Are you ready to go, Layla?
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Layla from Waverley Library, and I would love to talk today about one of our culture clubs. Let me just share my screen. Waverley has been running the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Culture Club since the first lockdown of 2020. During our sessions, we discuss books, films, and art by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists, exploring the history of culture of Australian First Nation people, using library resources, including books, e-resources and films from Canopy and Beamer Films. During lockdown, we run our sessions fortnightly, then monthly once back on site. We prepare suggested reading lists of books, articles, webinars, and talks, but everyone is free to bring their ideas for discussion. There is no formal structure, just a friendly group of regular members who attend and new people all the time. The purpose of the club is learning about First Nations cultures. Our members admitted that there are big gaps in their knowledge. Most of the club members are middle-aged people, and they said that they were not taught much about Aboriginal history of Australia at school and would like to fill those gaps. Waverley Council, Bondi Ward and Deputy Mayor Dominic Vaikanuk attended our sessions and participated in discussion. We had ideas to invite special guests to our sessions, but we decided to invite interesting people for talks and events run in the library, so everyone can attend, not only members of the group. We invited the historian Michael Bennett to talk about his book, Pathfinders, A History of Aboriginal Trackers of New South Wales, where he revealed that there were more than 1,000 Aboriginal men and women employed as police trackers in New South Wales between 1862 and 1973. Another guest was Peter Rees, a journalist for more than 40 years, working as federal political correspondent for the Melbourne Sun, the Western Australia and the Sunday Telegraph. He talked about his book, The Missing Man, From the Outback to Tarakan. It's a powerful story of Len Waters, the Royal Australian Air Force only Second World War Aboriginal fighter pilot. Ray Ingray, the chairman of Gujaga Foundation, was our special guest and talked about the Aboriginal history of La Perouse. The Gujaga Foundation is a peak organization leading language, cultural, and research activities within the La Perouse Aboriginal community. Gujaga provides services to educational, cultural, and corporate organizations related to our cultural area within Eastern, Southern, and Southwestern Sydney. We invited Sydney food writer and gastronom Paul Van Reyk to talk about his book, True to the Land. Paul's book provides a history of food in Australia from its beginnings, with the arrival of the first people and their stewardship of the land to the present. He talked about multicultural cuisine of modern Australia. Another interesting guest was John Newton, the author of The Oldest Spoon on Earth, A History of Australian Native Foods. We invited members of both culture groups, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Culture Club and Multicultural Cooking Club, for those talks. Last year, we went with members of Culture Club to the Sydney Writers' Festival gala event together. This year to Sydney Festival Barra concert, Nadia Simpson. Some of our members developed friendship and socialized outside of the class. Some participants have since enrolled in universities and TAFE to further their Aboriginal studies. The members of our club are the library users, and they constantly place book recommendations, which helps to build the library collection. I wish we had more younger people in our group. That's all from me.
Thank you, Leila. That was great. That looks like a beautiful program. Now, am I missing anybody? Is anybody who is expecting to give a 5-minute talk needing to give one? If not, I have a very quick one myself. One sec while I share my screen. Okay, now I don't be honest, really need a PowerPoint presentation for this. But I didn't want you to just have to look at me for 5 minutes. We're at the point at the moment where the Readers Advisory Working Group needs to recruit some new members. So seeing as I have been on it for a very long time now, I just wanted to share my experiences and to encourage you to consider joining. I did my library degree while my children were being born and were tiny. And when I finished, the library in the town where I live had a part-time local studies librarian position available. That was my very first professional librarian job. And though I wasn't uninterested in local studies, it wasn't my dream library job, as reading is my favorite pastime and really an integral part of my identity. So when the notice about the Readers Advisory Seminar came round on PLN, I let my manager know that if no one else more suitable was interested, I would really like to go. And I went, and there I found my people. I came back from that first seminar fired up with ideas and so many things that I wanted to do, and they weren't local studies related. But before too long, I had a new job that included Readers Advisory, and a colleague suggested that I join the working group. Now, I'm sorry for that boring overshare, but it was just to indicate that you don't have to have Readers Advisory as a major part of your job to get involved. And not every manager or council is going to support this sort of thing to the same degree, but certainly my manager has always been big on contributing to the network. It is good for us, it's good for us in our own work, and it's great for the state. And I have learned a great deal while I've been in the working group, going to meetings where library staff show what's going on in RA for them in their libraries and what they've been doing. I've always come back from seminars with practical ideas, programs or services that I want to try. And it's great to have a space to talk through ideas. I've learned so much about different genres, about how to suggest books to readers and how to use the available tools. And being on the working group has meant that I've been able to have RA meetings in my town and training opportunities too. Duncan Smith from Novelist came to Australia, and we were really able to, over those years, work with novelists to increase their Australia and New Zealand content. And hopefully we'll be able to do that with books and authors as well, now that we have that. I've also learned to liaise with authors, to organise speakers for the seminar, to participate in the running of the seminars, timekeeping, facilitating group chats, chairing sessions. I've made some really great friends and working relationships, and that led to my involvement with the New South Wales Library Events Author Talk program. There are all sorts of jobs that need doing in the group, not just upfront things. It's also helping to put together agendas for meetings in the seminar, chairing and taking minutes at the meetings, online planning. You do need to answer emails and actually get involved, and there can be travel involved depending on where you live and whether your job allows that, and depending on whether there are meetings or seminars coming up in that month. It can take between 1 and 4 hours per month to be involved, sort of that much work. And then I have been able to do some really exciting things as part of this group. One of my first jobs was to introduce Garth Nix at a seminar, and he was so delightful. And if I can just manage to share, there we go. I would like to say that this was my best day ever, except that, I'm married and have 3 children, and one of my daughters had a wedding too. So it wouldn't be politic for me to say this was my best day ever, but it was brilliant. We had Daniel O'Malley talk on science fiction at the 2019 Readers Advisory Seminar. And I was not the only person to enjoy it. If you missed it, you can go and catch it on the wiki. But if you would like a similar photo of yourself with a beloved Australian author, then join the working group and who knows what would happen. And if you would like to talk about joining the group, feel free to contact me or Ellen. Thank you. And now it is time for us to go into groups. I think Ellen is going to split us up into moderated chat groups, and this is a really good opportunity for us to share with each other about what we've learned this morning and about our favourite RA tools. Ellen.
Yep, and we might make them 10 minutes rather than 15 so that we don't cut too much of lunch, because we've got someone, one of the authors from Stick Mob after lunch, and we kind of don't want to push him back. So I'm just going to separate you into breakout rooms, and you'll have someone to facilitate your discussions.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the afternoon session. I hope you've had a lovely break. There is a little poll there that we have been filling in during lunch, and here are the results. We are still heavily print based. That is fascinating. Right, well, I'm so excited. This afternoon, we are going to be hearing from Declan Miller from Stick Mob. He is a graphic novelist from Central Australia. On his father's side, he's from the Arandar and Amateer lands. His mother was born in Scotland. He started to write his graphic novel series when he was in year 8. He's now finished school and is co-founder and creative director of the startup business Stick Mob Studio. He's currently enrolled in visual arts at Griffith University, and last year he wrote and directed an online storytelling course, as he is passionate about inspiring people to tell their stories. Welcome, Declan.
Alright, Undamura, everybody. That means hello, how are you? In my language is Central Aranda. I'm from Alice Springs. As you heard from Amy, beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. Yes, today I'm going to be talking to you about what graphic novels are and Stick Mob a little bit and all that stuff. So I'll just give you a bit of background, a little bit more background on me. How I got into graphic novels is when I was younger, so in primary school and all that type of stuff, I actually, I struggled with reading and writing, but I was always really ready to tell stories and all that type of stuff. And I strive to try and tell stories through words, through like pen, paper and all that type of stuff, and trying to write it down. But no one could really get the story across from me. I could easily explain it through my words, but they can never understand the full story when it was down on paper. So what happened is I was really good at drawing, and I was really good at expressing myself creatively through that medium of pictures to tell a story. So it started off just becoming this small thing and building it up and building it up, and going through school, just trying to pass school. And what was really interesting is, well, not really interesting, but about in year 9, or end of year 9, about year 10, I actually was diagnosed with a rare case of dyslexia. So that gave it a reason on why I struggled with school and all that type of stuff. And the funny thing is, around the same time is actually when I started to actually learn how to read and write. I actually properly got taught by one of my teachers how to read and write. And when I started my book in year 8 and all that type of stuff, I just kept it to myself, kept it as this little thing. But eventually I showed it to the right person, which was Wendy Cowan, my co-partner for Stick Mob. And she was one of my teachers at the time for an after-school program, which was a little bit like Homework Center, but for Indigenous kids and all that stuff. And so she really was really inspired by it, and she really wanted to push me through and show me what it was like, show me that I have potential in this field, even though I struggle with reading and writing. But she saw that I could easily convey a story through art and all that type of stuff. So eventually it became this big thing. We got the Indigenous Literacy Foundation on board, and they paid for Wolfgang Blismer from Gestalt Publishing. They've published The Deep, you might know the big TV show Clever Man and all that stuff from TV. They published the comic book series for that, and they go to world events all over the world, and they pay for Wolfgang and the first Indigenous graphic novelist, Brenton E. McKenna, to come down. He's the creator of Ubby's Underdogs, to come down and mentor us and show us how to create graphic novels professionally. And Wolfgang and Brenton both saw that I had potential. And at the same time, I had these 3 other girls that were in the same grade as me, or grade lower than me, that also had potential, because they were actually helping me design my backgrounds for my story. And they saw how much of a creative talent they had with their art, and they're able to express themselves as well. They created 2 other stories, which was Storm Warning and Exo Dimensions. And so we had these 3 stories that we were all creating together and working together. And it was really important to have that support from the mentors and have that support of each other, that we're all going through the same process of creating these stories, that it's not just one of us working on it our own, but it's the whole group facing the same problems, facing the same difficulties on actually telling a story. And the lack of motivation, writer's block, all that type of stuff. It's a lot of work to tell a story and create a story. And for us to be able to work together and push each other was the thing that actually got us through creating these 3 stories, because they weren't a 10-page, 15-page little comic that we had in the 60s. This was a 40-page, 44, 45-page graphic novel that was about nearly a centimeter thick. And it had so much work put into it. And this was the first of many stories that ILF and Gestalt wanted to come from us as this group. And we realized that we wanted to be able to make money, and we wanted to be able to take our experiences from creating graphic novels and help other people. And that's when Stickmob became a thing. We became this group, and we started this group so that we could help other people express themselves creatively, and give them the space to be able to be creative and express themselves creatively through different mediums. So whether that's normal word narratives, whether that's through graphic novels, music, art, anything. It was just, we wanted to be able to give the people the green light, the thumbs up to be creative, whether that's giving them a space, or whether that's just being there to let them vent all their ideas to us, being that creative buffer for them. Because sometimes all they need is just that, someone just to be there to listen, and just there to be a space for them to be able to work. Because, there's kids at home with certain people that, they got to look after their younger siblings, or they have kids of their own that they're very preoccupied with doing it. So when they come to our space, they're free from kids, they're free from seeing younger siblings annoying them, they're free from doing certain things, like other responsibilities in their life, and they just get that hour, they just get that time to just work solely on what they want to do and be creative about it. And it seems really simple, but not a lot of people have that. And that's what's amazing about it, is just giving them that time to be able to do it. And when my mentors gave me that time to be able to be creative, I created a book when I never thought I would pass school. And in 2020, I finished year 12. And in 2022, I'm going to university when I didn't think I would pass school, when I didn't know that I would, I was getting, C's and D's through high school and middle school and all that type of stuff. I was, scraping at the bottom of the barrel, you could say. And not to put myself down, but I was struggling at school, and I just didn't find that groove with school. But as soon as graphic novels came into my life, I found out that all the skills that I was doing in making graphic novels I was able to convert that into my class subjects. And in year 12, I pass with a lot of my grades being B and A+ above and all that type of stuff. And that was because I realized that this thing I love so much had all the possibilities and had all the skills to be able to, write a narrative, which was my manuscript for my book, for one of my classes, for English, to do all these certain things. It's just waving that into it. And instead of focusing on those aspects of my schooling to, try and struggle through doing this, struggled writing an essay and this and that, I was like, can I write an essay? But since I'm good at personal speaking and all that type of stuff, I will do it as a presentation and get marked as a presentation through it. So I'm not saying that graphic novels will save someone or get them through school. I'm just saying it's another way of being creative. It's another way of looking at school. And there's different ways you can look at school instead of the conventional, traditional means of they hand you an assignment, you have to stress out and worry about doing it. So, yep, I went on a bit of a rant, but I'll talk a little bit more about StickMob. So StickMob, at the moment, we've got 2 full-time people working on it. We're not being paid at the moment, but we're just working at it of, we want this to become a thing. So we're giving it as much of our free time as we possibly can. I'm the creative director for StickMob, so I make sure that all the graphic novelists know what they're doing. Any commissions that come along, I make sure that the girls understand and I understand what the person commissioning us wants. As Amy said, I created an online course explaining how to create a graphic novel and 9 easy modules and all that type of stuff. The modules the videos in it only go for 10 minutes and all that type of stuff. And the time between each module really depends on you as a creative. So it takes you through the 7 steps on how to make a graphic novel, 1 comic book page. So that's manuscript, scripting, thumbnailing, penciling, coloring, and text. And the 2 other or 3 other modules and all that stuff in there are just little different things, just explaining certain parts about what it is being a graphic novelist. So like writer's block, working digitally. So it's a huge, steep gap and all that kind of stuff, learning curve to be able to work digitally from conventional means, which is pen and paper and all that type of stuff. It does take a while to get to learn it. And I explained that it's anything you're probably pretty much doing on a computer and it's not working and you feel like it's breaking and all that stuff. It's probably your fault because you pressed the button wrong. But, it's just learning that okay, I've just got to take some time and just learn how everything works. And just little things like character development, what it means to develop a character and where they fit in your space, and also a bit of world building and what inspires you as a graphic novelist and an artist and all that type of stuff, and a storyteller. Yeah, I feel like we've gone on a bit of a rant too much. Talked a little bit too long, but anyone would like to ask any questions of me? I can check the group, I can check the chat and all that stuff. So, okay, I just read the chat. So any more plans for StickMob publications? So actually, StickMob, we're starting book 2s. So we're about halfway through finishing book 2s and all that type of stuff. And so the second volumes for each book, so Mixed Feelings, Storm Warning, and Exo Dimensions. Mixed Feelings, my book, and Exo Dimensions is Seraphina Newberry. She wasn't born in Alice Springs, but she's from the APY lands. She's part of a very famous artist family and all that type of stuff. You look up the Newberries. And Storm Warning is illustrated by Alyssa Mason and written by Lauren Boyle. So Lauren really loves telling stories and all that type of stuff, and she's really great with writing like scripts and all that type of stuff. I like to go to her when I had trouble writing my scripts, like, oh, how do I spell this? How do I do that? I want to make these characters seem interesting. How do I do that? And she was really lovely, and it was great having that support by her. And she also helped do a bit of the coloring. She was one of the colorists for Storm Warning and all that type of stuff. And Alyssa, she's an amazing artist. She is so very talented, and she makes everything really, really cool to be able to work with. And I always come to her, and it's like, you know, I have a problem, go to these guys. They have a problem, come to me, and all that type of stuff. I always go to her when I have a problem with how to draw hands, because she is the ultimate master of drawing hands, and I struggle with it so much. I just try and like put them in the pockets, try to hide them away and all that type of stuff. But she's kind of like, bring them back, bring them back. Yeah. So book 2s, they're coming out soon. So we're trying to get them done for August this year. Hopefully they're published and all that type of stuff then. Let's go through another question. Wow, there's a lot of people in the chat. Any graphic novels series which inspired? Are there any graphic novels series which inspired me? So I actually go through that in my online course and all that stuff. So there's a couple of comic book series that inspire me. So manga from Japan and all that stuff really inspired me, because they work so diligently and work so very hard and really focus on storytelling and the characters and the development on that type of stuff. The Amulet series by I've forgotten how to say his name, Kozuo Kubiashi. Amulet series, it's a graphic novel series. Book 9 is actually just coming out, so it's a very big graphic novel series that's like a bit bigger than this guy and all that stuff for each book. It's about 100 and something pages. It's amazing series and all that type of stuff. The Cleverman series, what's really interesting for me to figure out, because like the page composition, and also having another Indigenous graphic novelist to being able to tell a story and actually inspire me to be like, hey, I may be a graphic novelist, but push through it and actually tell this story and be able to, you know, yes, things have been done before, but we stand on the shoulders of giants, which is what Wendy likes to say all the time and all that type of stuff, which is things have done before, but it's how you do them, which makes it different. Let's go to another one, another question from the public libraries. Yeah, so we, in Alice Springs, we have the Stickmob books in our library and all that type of stuff. I'm not 100% sure. ILEFs did send out a lot of books to public libraries and this and that. My book is actually in my library at my university, which is amazing, because I can just go there and be like, hey, I did this. But it is in my library. It's in SA uni library and all that type of stuff, Flinders University and all that stuff. Yeah, they should be there. A lot of local bookshops, because one of the things that ILF does is partner with local bookshops. They have a lot of them as well. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, there's a lot of places would have them and all that type of stuff. You can also look up on ILF's website and Goshal Publishing website to check them out, and a lot of Booktopia, a lot of websites and all that type of stuff to find them if you can't find them locally. I did some morning collection. Hi Declan, do you travel interstate to deliver workshops? Yes, I do. So I was planning we got workshops in the works and all that stuff. Due to COVID, everything's online at the moment, but I love personally doing in-person workshops and all that type of stuff. I'm a very hands-on person. You know, I don't like to stand at the front much and talk at people, because that's what school does. I try to stand a bit side from school and all that type of stuff. And, you know, I like to be like, here's what we're going to do. And as they're doing it, I like to explain certain things, and any problems that people have, I like to explain that during the workshops, because we're all learning together. And I love doing workshops, because I never go go into the workshop thinking I'm the one teaching the workshop. I'm the one that knows everything, this and that, because I always learn new things when I go to workshops, because I'm very early into my career, and there's a lot of people at these different workshops that have, you know, a little bit longer in the career of doing workshops and creating stories and novels and all that stuff. So I like to learn from them as well. We've got some workshops in Tasmania with the Hobart schools and all that type of stuff. We're just waiting for funding for them to come through, and hopefully near the end of this year or start of next year, hopefully that's a possibility. We've got some workshops possibly in Darwin to do with the local schools there in Palmerston. The two separate places. But yeah, we love to do it, and I love to go down and check them out. And hopefully when COVID dies down, we can do some workshops in local communities and all that type of stuff in Northern Territory and all over Australia and all that type of stuff. But at the moment, it's just solely online. Helpful for people to help. From maybe, is there something libraries could run that you think would be helpful for young people to help them share their stories? See, there's a thing with just like that you could be creative and you could be like, oh, we're gonna, you know, get a graphic novelist and get an author in and all that type of stuff. But sometimes the problem with that, and it's not the author's fault, it's not the library's fault, it's nothing. It's they bring these authors in and all that type of stuff. They run a workshop, they get everyone inspired, and then they're kind of just left to their own devices for like a month or two until you get another author in. And it's that constant reassurance, it's that constant working together and all that type of stuff. We never like to just go to a workshop, and I never like to just go to a workshop and be like, all right, I'm done for today, goodbye guys, see you later. I always like to try and keep back in touch, because people do need that support, and people do need that like, you know, that mentorship like I had, that mentorship. And I know that's really difficult to be able to give to kids and be able to give to people constantly. But what you could do is, you know, you could just have, not 100% sure how you could do it. You could run little kind of workshops being like, oh, you guys can write stories, you can do this, here's a space for you guys to be able to tell a story. I don't know if it could attract kids or not. You could pretty much do like a recommended list on like really interesting stories. You could do like the poll that you did, but with like a handful of stories and all that type of stuff. And yeah, a lot of people's tastes are different, and a lot of people like work very different as well, and all that kind of stuff. But if you bring the kids together or people together and be like, hey, we write a story, that could be a possibility. Okay, reach the bottom. Would you guys, do you have any more questions for me and all that kind of stuff? So Storm Warning and like Stick Mob. So at the moment, the 3 stories that we're creating are how do I say it? Mid-teenager rate. So Mixed Feelings is 12 and upwards. Storm Warning is about in your, 14, 15s and upwards. And Extra Dimensions is a little bit more of an adult side, 16 and upwards and all that kind of stuff, because of the MA16 plus type of gore. And it's very post-apocalyptic. It's a very Mad Max theme type of story and all that kind of stuff. It's got mutants, it's got robots, cyborgs, and all that type of stuff. It's really amazing. And Storm Warning is yeah, they're youth graphic novels and all that type of stuff. So youth graphic novels made by youth to give to youth and all that type of stuff. What kind of things are you reading to present? I'm sorry, I don't get that question. What am I reading personally? So at the moment, I am reading I've got a lot of, at the moment, I'm working on the side on a slice of life. So that's a slice of life rom-com romance type of stories. So I'm actually writing a story, a drama, all that type of stuff. And I'm more of an action thriller, horror, comedy type of story. So I don't actually know how to not make characters want to fight each other and not have like really serious high stake type of things. So I'm actually reading this story called Heartstoppers, and it's a bisexual, it's like a homosexual type of story with two boys, and they go to school together and all that type of stuff, and they learn, you know, that they like each other and this and that. And it's kind of like finding who you are and finding yourself. It's a very interesting story. It's actually getting a Netflix series, and they've got 4 big books coming out at the moment. Well, 4 big books that are already out that you can buy in stores and all that type of stuff. I know Dymocks has them, and I know Booktopia has them. I'm not 100% if you guys might have them or anything like that, but they have been awarded like Kids' Choice Award and all that type of stuff. A lot of people really enjoy it and really like it, and I'm enjoying it as well, because it's a very slow-paced story that I'm used to. I'm not. You get to learn more about the characters in it, and you get to learn more about, you know, who they are and what they like, and, you know, it's more life. It's more realistic and all that type of stuff. And I want to get more into that. I want to get to more of the personal side of learning who characters are, and being able to create characters and do my character development a lot better through it, and tell stories a lot better. So that's what I'm reading currently. And yeah, actually, it's one of the few books that I've read, you know, fully. Yeah. What are you studying at? So I'm studying. So at the moment, so I didn't have enough credits to get into the course I wanted to, which is animation, degree in animation, all that stuff. So I'm doing a year of visual arts and visual art to figure out what uni's like, how it is living in a city. This is the second week I've been in a city. This is the longest I've been in a city for. I've always born and raised, grew up in Alice Springs. So, you know, figuring out how trains and buses work and everything being really annoying and really loud and all that stuff all the time is very different to what I'm used to. Yeah, so visual arts, it's my second week doing it, and I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm figuring it out, and it's very freeing. It's a lot of like go with the flow and just enjoy the experience, which is really cool and really amazing. Are there any graphic novels you could recommend for people who don't read graphic novels to start with? That recommend teens. I would recommend the Amulet series. It's a very slow-paced story to get into, and it, you know, it's not too violent. It's not this. It's not that. It's a very heartfelt story about a kid just figuring out her life and growing up, and, you know, it's a bit of escapism in it. I'd explain a little bit more. It's a bit of escapism where she's like, there's a lot of stuff that's happened in her family, and like she's moved from another place and this and that, and she just kind of just, you know, she's going through her teenager years and all that stuff, and she doesn't want to be in this space, and she gets taken to a new world, and she has to figure out that new world and this and that. And it's a really interesting story, and I really love it. And I inspire to have the amazing and beautiful backgrounds that they have done, and I wish to be that creative and amazing. Another story would be what is it? Any DC Marvel stories, they're very interesting. Any manga, so My Hero Academia, One Piece, they're very slow-paced stories because they've been going since 1998 or a little bit later, earlier, and all that type of stuff. I think with One Piece, they've gotten up to their 1,000th issue of the book, so they're still going now. So there's a lot. They have hiatuses 3 times a year to be able to make it, and they pump out 1 or 2 books every month, and it's this thick books. So it's about 100 150 pages each month. They're only in black and white, but they tell a very amazing story, and they give you lots of detail on the characters. And it's a very fun little story just to go along with and all that type of stuff. Yeah, I had a list, but I don't know where I put it. I will see if I can email it through and you guys can all get it. For someone who's new at reading graphic novels, what would you recommend when they start? Start small, start at a small story and all that type of stuff. Graphic novels are very diverse. There's a lot of media out there. I go to like a bookshop and pick up the nearest book that looks interesting, has a cool cover and all that kind of stuff. That's how I got into it. And yeah, I I had that list that I could tell you, but sorry. The title of one. Title of the talking about. Using thank you. Yeah. That's all the questions that I have at the moment. Yeah, so I'll explain a little bit what's so important about graphic novels. So what's so amazing about graphic novels is I'll give you a little bit of a story, a little bit of an overview and all that type of stuff. I don't know if I have, let's see how much time I have a little bit more time. What's so, like, I'll give you a little story and all that kind of stuff. So there's a game series and all that kind of stuff from a gaming series called Dark Souls, from a gaming series called From Software. And what's so amazing about this series is I'm going a bit off the rails here, but I'm just trying to make up time. What's so amazing about this series is it tells you a lot about the world, and it pretty much just shows it to you. It doesn't really explain much by narration or this and that. And what it does is it lets the people that the character talks to and lets the enemies that the person fights and this and that and the villains and all that stuff tell the story, because the creator of the actual game and the story and all that stuff, he grew up in when Japan was, he grew up in Japan and all that stuff, and he grew up reading and all that stuff, all the DC and Marvel comics and all that kind of stuff. But he couldn't read it fully because he didn't know how to read English, but he knew what certain words are. And what was amazing is he knew who the main character was, he knew who the villain was, and he knew where the character was because of the pictures. And he just read it by the pictures and all that type of stuff. And over time, he learned certain words. And what's great about it is when you're mentored and when I'm taught how to be a graphic novelist, is you learn these skills on that. If an audience member flips through your book or flips through any graphic novel, they immediately learn who's talking, where the character is, who's the bad guy, and what time zone and all that stuff they are in. And it's amazing for people that have very low literacy skills and that struggle with reading and writing like I have, because it doesn't solely hold on to the fact that if you don't read the words, you don't understand the story. The words do help, and sound effects and all that type of stuff do help, but it's mainly the story and where the audience is being led by the graphic novel to understand how it is and all that stuff. And it makes it very important as a graphic novelist to learn that skill very early, because then you'll be back and forth with your publisher like I have. They're like, oh, that doesn't make sense, change that, do this, do that. And it's a very long, strenuous process so that everyone understands your story. And I think that's what's really important for having it out in the communities and having it out there and having it in books, in libraries and all that stuff, is so that kids that, they're like, I don't know how to read, like they've kind of just given up on it. Like they want to try, but they just kind of given up on it. Giving them that opportunity with graphic novels and giving them that opportunity to see that there is something like picture books and all that stuff is something for them to get into and want to actually try and read and actually want to learn what this story is about and this and that. So yeah, it's one way to push to get graphic novels in your libraries. I've got stuff in the group chat. Was comics There are interesting and non-fiction ones, which are they it's also a really great skill to learn to be able to convey a message. So like when I'm back in Alice Springs and all that type of stuff, I actually work for a separate company called Central Land Council, CLC. And what I'm going to be doing is creating visual journals and visual manuals and all that stuff for them. So I'm taking that skill that I learned from graphic novels and, you know, something, because they work with communities and they send these things out to, you know, their rangers and this and that. And a lot of rangers are local Indigenous people, and, you know, their education isn't great out in the communities and all that stuff. So having those things, so like, you know, how to catch a snake in a visual format would be amazing for them, instead of someone sitting at the front of a classroom speaking at them and them only understanding a certain parts of it and all that stuff. You and your fellow artists available for collaborations with other graphic novel authors, or for commissions by organizations looking for artwork? Yes, so that's what we're doing. I've just been commissioned by a streamer and all that stuff. He does streaming, playing video games and all that stuff. He wanted me to create his, you know, logo, and he paid me to do that. Because he liked my artwork and I knew him. Alyssa Mason, she's being commissioned by the women's shelter in Alice Springs to create a poster that's more friendly to people and makes them feel a little bit more safe, because it's you got very stagnant posters of like a picture of, you know, a family, or a picture of, you know, a worker helping someone, and making it more diverse and less, you know, racially focused and all that type of stuff. Like there's a mixture of races and this and that, where it's not just black and white. It's like, you know, people helping and working together to make people feel safe and everything like that. What's it called? Yeah, Serafina and Wendy at the moment are preparing for a gallery. And they're doing a gallery at the local gallery place called Watch This Space in Alice Springs, and that's a series of profile pictures, drawings and paintings, and different, you know, mediums and all that stuff, to just, you know, get more of their artwork out there, and to test their abilities as a graphic novelist and to test their abilities as artists and all that stuff. One of the great things about me being in visual art this year is that I can, you know, play around with sculpture. I can play around with painting. I always saw myself as a drawer and digital artist, and doing more hands-on stuff makes me feel more comfortable being an artist, being more comfortable being asked different commissions by different organizations, like murals, this and that. Like possibilities are endless when it comes to learning different skills. Are there any recent upcoming graphic novels you would recommend or are excited about? A lot of them are manga and all that stuff related. So Chainsaw Man, that's one thing. It's more of a action-packed type of story. New books of One Piece are coming out. There's another one called Tokyo Ghoul, which is more of the adult side and all that type of stuff. But yeah, it's just giving that more diverse outlook and all that stuff. A lot of my books that I'm recommending are what I personally like, and you know, a lot of people, I don't know a lot of more slice of life, a little bit less action and a little bit more romantic and this and that. I don't know a lot, but there is a lot out there. There is quite a lot out there. Any other Australian graphic novelists you would like to recommend? You can recommend Justin Randall. He's one of my other mentors and all that stuff. He helped. He made his original series Changing Ways. He's an amazing graphic novelist. He does a lot of coloring. Being a colorist, that's how he makes his money. That's how he, you know, makes his living and all that type of stuff. And he also does sometimes casual lecturing at his local university near him in Sydney. I'm not sure which university he goes to, but he does that. Brenton McKenna, he's really great. Brenton E. McKenna, the Ubbies on a Dog series doesn't get as much hype and credit that it deserves because it's an amazing trilogy series, and each book nearly has 600 pages in it, and it's amazing. You can really see with each page, as each page goes on, his art style develop and become something new, and you see the characters get better at drawing, like being drawn, and get more dynamic and get more comfortable being in the poses that Brenton puts them in. And that's really important with, like, you know, book twos and this and that, is seeing your artwork develop over the series, over the duration of creating that graphic novel, and seeing how it's develops and all that type of stuff. So at the start, you can, when I finished my first book, I looked at the first page and I looked at that last page, and I saw the drastic difference on, like, you know, detail and style. And I had to get, you know, Alyssa, Serafina and Lauren to hold me back from wanting to change the, you know, a couple of pages and all that kind of stuff, because I wanted them to look that nice like the last pages were. But then you just get a constant cycle of getting better and better and better. So we leave all the development to the next book, and then to the next book, and soon we'll be able, you won't even recognize these are that the first book and the last book are the same artist. There's a lot of graphic novels. Where do you get your ideas from on your own content? Do you have any strategies to get the creative juices flowing? I really suck at this, but where all my creative juices come from is, you know, reading other books, watching other movies, like watching movies, watching stories, reading other books, reading other graphic novels, playing games. I get it from a lot of different sources. You know, I get that feeling where it's kind of like, I want to do that. I want to be able to create that type of story. Like, if someone's you know, Avengers and DC and Marvel and all that stuff, they've got movies out now, and that started in the 50s and the 60s. Like, how amazing is that they got this, you know, $1 billion like TV show and like series happening? And so a couple of ways of getting creative juices flowing is just going online, checking out your artists that you really like, and just seeing how they do it, watching shows, doing this, doing that. You really get a lot of your creative juices from the things around you and your own personal experiences. So that story that one of your friends told you that you thought was really funny and really amazing, that can be put in a story. That idea that you had like years ago about a character, or years ago just from watching a series and all that stuff, that can be a story. You've just got to build on it, and you just got to get the space and the opportunity to be able to make that. See, when I'm always like watching and reading these shows, I kind of get really frustrated, because I just want to go do something. I want to go make a story. I want to go work on my book and this and that. And it sucks if I'm watching a 3-hour movie in the cinema, because I'm just want to get up about an hour in and just leave, even though I paid and everything. What age groups is your online course aimed at? So at the moment, what a lot of people are doing, is schools, they're getting the teacher, they're, you know, getting it for a class, and, you know, the class works on the course together to be able to like make different stories and use the tools from the online course to make, you know, a single graphic novel, comic book page, or, you know, make a short 3-paneled story and all that type of stuff. I would say it's about 14 and upwards. They would need assistance, you know, with printing the supporting documents, which is, you know, one of the documents is literally any when you're creating your character development and all that stuff, it's like, what's the character's name? What does he look like? Where's he from? All this type of stuff. Just little general questions just to get your head scratching to be able to create that character. Like, what's his favorite color? What's he good at? What's he not good at? Who's his friends? And once you get into the friends part, then that leads on to, you know, doing another sheet to develop your friends, the friends for that character, and it just goes on and on and on. And then you pretty much, you can use all those questions to be able to mold together and create this one character. Or you could draw the character first and then, you know, vice versa. It's asking simple questions to build up those characters and all that type of stuff. And a lot of them, why I made the video so short is because I want them to put it simply and all that type of stuff. I had days, I had weeks and all that stuff to be mentored and be taught by my lecturers, by my mentors, by Wolfgang and Brenton and all that type of stuff. I had weeks and months to work with them and do this, where, you know, with the online course, you can have weeks and months to work on it, but I just want the short and sharp. This is what this step is for, and this is what it's good for, and this is what it's amazing, and this is how you can put that into your story. And this is how I've done it. You could do it like this differently and all that type of stuff. It's just making it as simple as possible so that anyone can possibly enjoy it and understand it and all that stuff. Do you need any special equipment or software to do the course? No, I've solely made the course pen and paper. You can, at the end in coloring and all that stuff, I use very fancy pens to color my page and all that stuff. They're called Coptics. If you have the budget to get them, but they're about $14 to $20 per pen. So I wouldn't recommend it. But you know, you could probably find a cheap 100 case one and all that stuff on Chapman and Bailey's or Jackson's or something like that, or your local art shop or something like that. If you want to move digitally, you could just use, you could just use a normal texters or pencils or pens or anything to be able to color your pages and all that stuff. The software you could possibly need is, you know, Word, if you want to type your ideas or type your script and all that stuff online and all that. If not, a lot of everything is kind of just there. You can copy and paste that into a journal or, you know, one of your books or something like that. So it's very easy to just be able to just, you know, just watch your page, watch your screen, and then just work on by paper and all that. If you want to move your stuff to digital, going to, you know, if you're still in school, going to your class, going to your teachers and scanning your pages in, and then moving to if the schools that your libraries are working with have Photoshop, use that. If they don't, there is a free Photoshop-like service called Krita, and that's free to download and free to use. There's heaps of manuals and there's heaps of like how to work, how to do, and all that stuff on YouTube and online for people to be able to figure out. That's a free one. If you do have an extra, if you want to get something for your kid, if they have a tablet, so if they have like a Apple tablet, get Procreate. That's about $10 to $14, and all you need is an Apple Pen, and it has all the services like Photoshop does. If you just have a normal laptop and you don't have a tablet of any sort and all that stuff, I would recommend getting a Wacom, just normal. You can get a Cintiq, which is like a screen, and you draw on it and all that type of stuff, and you can see where you're drawing. Or you could just get a normal, like they've got these little Bluetooth tablets where you have to look at the screen and draw at the same time to be able to get that hand-eye coordination. For the software for that, you could use Photoshop, or if you have an extra 100 or two laying around, get a service called Clip Studio Pro. And that's more up in the range of, you know, if they've been doing it for, you know, a couple of months, maybe a year now, and, you know, just Procreate or something, it like Krita isn't cutting it anymore. Clip Studio Pro is what we use in the studio and all that stuff. And what it is it's designed directly for artists to be able to make art and create graphic novels and do this and do that. Yeah. Let's see now. What is the rough cost for the workshops? So for an in-person workshop, it can, depending if it's a school or depending if it's a normal service and all that stuff, we understand that schools have budgets because Wendy worked at a school and things go, you know, they only have a certain budget for doing certain things. So the schools, it's roughly 300 and I think 75. And for a like organizational workshop that's, you know, outside of a school or outside of, you know, working with this, it's around 500 and all that stuff. So it's, we made it cost effective so that, you know, anyone could possibly get into it and anyone can do it if they have a grant or this and that. I worked with, I still work with students and all that type of stuff from Alice Springs, Darwin, a couple other places and all that stuff. Like I meet up with them once a month regularly just to see how they're going. And that becomes, you know, quite a personal thing with them because after that one-on-one workshop and all that, it's kind of just like, all right, here's all the tools. Like, it's great. I've got your story. I understand your characters. I understand where you're coming from. Right, cool. Here's all the stuff you need to do it. Or like, you know, if you have time in the next month, do it, smash out as much as you can. And we will see if we can make up a time next month, or if you can't afford that month, further down the track. And then in that hour, we can quickly go through everything and quickly understand that, like, you know, that you need to do this, you need to do that. That's amazing. That's like that. It's that constant reassurance and all that stuff that they're doing a good job. And, that, you know, that they're not being dissuaded and disheartened that, like, you know, oh, but this has already been done before. Oh, but like, you know, how is this even good? Oh, my art style isn't great. You know, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what your art style is all about. There's a really famous manga from Japan. It's called One Punch Man, and it's meant to be a joke series and all that stuff. But the original series of it, it's, you know, I think it was only about 20 to 40 books in, and like it was all online, and the actual author of it, he didn't know how to draw. He didn't have a great art style, but he drew all the characters in a comic book format, and he wanted to get that story out because he believed that the story will be great, and someone, hopefully one day, that has a better art style than me will check it out, and we'll see how amazing it is. And it's developed to this certain thing where a professional manga artist has taken on the role as the graphic novel writer and drawer for it, and now it's out in book form, and they're near the end of the series, and I think it's nearly up to their 90th book or something like that. It's crazy. It's been going on for a couple of years, and it's like, I'm not saying that, you know, you need to wait until someone that better than you to start drawing your story, but I'm just saying that things take time. Your art style will take time, and you will develop better as an artist, and you will develop better as a graphic novelist. You just need time to work on it. You just need time and people to support you doing it. What does it cost for the course? It's about $200 for a school. So if a school, like just the one license for a school, and it's about $40 for an individual. Yeah, so we just wanted to, we wanted to make it more, but I was just like, no, we want it so that everyone can be able to use it. Everyone can work on it. And yeah, we teach, what you teach them how to draw and write, or how do you understand, or how to understand. So it's how to understand graphic novels, how to draw and write a graphic novel. I teach them certain skills and certain abilities that I learned as a graphic novelist, but I don't solely teach them that, you know, oh, this is how you proportion a character. This is how you do this. This is how you do that, because there's a million ways to skin a cat. Like there's a million ways to write a story and tell a story. I show them a couple of things on how to draw a head in different angles and this and that, because that's what I struggled with, making sure that two characters can look at each other, not one look that way and that guy look up that. It's just, you know, that's what I struggle with. I want people to this and that. I do a bit of shading, which is called blacking out, which, you know, leaves more on the coloring side. And, you know, it's an option that people can do, and it's an option they don't have to do. They can just do normal shading and all that stuff. And I do a little bit of like, if the light's pointing from that angle, you know, that half is going to be blacked out. That angle, that half's going to be blacked out. It's show them just the basics on how to do shading and this and that, because yeah, it's really up to a lot of people on how they want to convey their story and how to do that. If they just want a normal black and white story, that's cool. You can understand how to do shading and work more on the detail. If you want to do color and no outline and all that stuff, then that's really cool. You can learn different color palettes and this and that. It's a very free game. It's a lot of room to be able to create and do whatever. What is the length of the training? So since it's a 10 module course, you know, the first module is only about like the actual video in the module is only 10 minutes. But how long it takes you to create your manuscript. So the first module is manuscript and all that stuff. However long it takes you to write your manuscript is how long that module will take you. So I will give you ideas for like starting sentences and this and that in like the supporting documents and how to lay out your manuscript. And I will give you an example on how I laid out a manuscript for the Todd's Adventures story that I kind of like worked through. So I started with Todd's Adventures and then we worked through it on the module course. Yeah, if it takes you a couple of days to write a quick manuscript explaining like, you know, a three-paneled story, like a one-page story and all that stuff, that's really cool. If it takes you a week or two to get your whole 5,000-word essay, whole thing out there at once, then that's cool as well. It's really kind of just like, here's what you can do. Now you do it, and once you finish that, move on to the next step. And it's not like, oh, you have to get this done next month or this. It's giving you a lot more creative freedom that I didn't have when I was creating my story and all that kind of stuff, because my publisher was just like, I need it by May, you get it done by May or else. And I'm like, okay, like, you know, yeah, it's more of a freeing experience for people, so they're not as stressed, so they don't get as deterred away from creating stories like some people will, when they're just like, oh, I want someone to help me, I want someone to mentor me, where sometimes that may be a bit full on for them. So this is more of a hands-off approach for them. Yeah, staff can have this training. They can do it. It's very, very simple to learn. The 7 steps is the golden rule, and all the other little steps that you learn and little abilities and skills that you learn with it is just extra icing on the top. As long as you get the 7 steps right and how to convey a story, how to do this, how to do that, then you're right. It's very easy to sit down for an hour or two, just going over the story, write a quick, to like, if you want to plan a lesson or something like that, or like plan a workshop, it's very easy to, you know, watch the unit, watch the course and all that stuff, do a quick write-up on a example manuscript and this and that, and then take that into a workshop and be like, okay, we're going to be working on this today. And, you know, here's some ideas, this and that. So yeah. It's a really good launching point if people want to help support other people in creating a story.
Well, thank you so much, Declan. That has been really brilliant. It's been so inspiring to hear how graphic novels have helped you to unlock the power of stories in your life, and given us lots of ideas of how libraries can build their graphic novel collections and support our communities in their storytelling as well. So we wish you lots of luck with your uni and with StickMob, and thank you so much for sharing with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope you guys all see how amazing graphic novels are and hopefully inspire other people to make graphic novels. Thank you so much.
We will be getting all of the StickMob novels for graphic novels for our libraries.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, guys.
And now it's time for us to head into our second breakout session. So I think Ellen will be popping us all into our separate rooms so we can talk about some of the things that we've learned.
Yep, and there'll be slightly different breakout. You'll just be in a different breakout room. You'll probably have some of the same people in it, but you'll have some different people in it as well.